When people think no one important is watching, that's when their true character appears. Alexandria Morgan stood at the window of her corner office, gazing at the planes taking off in perfect sequence against the Chicago skyline. At 45, she carried herself with a quiet confidence that needed no announcement. Her dark skin glowed in the morning light, her natural hair pulled back in a simple style that spoke of elegance without ostentation. Outside her floor-to-ceiling windows, the Horizon Airways fleet gleamed in the sunlight, each aircraft bearing the distinctive blue and silver livery she had personally approved during the company's rebranding 3 years ago. "You really think this is necessary, Alex?" Anthony Rivera asked, leaning against her doorframe. At 38, the VP of Operations was her most trusted lieutenant, the first person she'd hired when taking over the struggling airline 7 years ago. His charcoal suit contrasted with the vibrant yellow tie that had become his trademark, a splash of optimism in an industry known for its conservatism. "I know it is," Alex replied, turning from the window. "The customer satisfaction reports don't match what I'm hearing on social media. Something's missing." She tapped her tablet, bringing up a series of complaint threads. "Look at these patterns. Certain demographics consistently report different experiences in our premium cabins." Anthony nodded, understanding the unspoken. As a Hispanic man in aviation, he'd seen his share of disparate treatment. The subtle redirections at check-in, the double takes from flight attendants when he sat in first class, the assumptions that he was in the wrong place. The invisible CEO program. "You sure the board will back this?" "They already have." "Quarterly assessments where I travel as an ordinary passenger. No special treatment. No recognition. No warnings to the crew. I see what our passengers see." She picked up a simple cream cardigan, a far cry from the tailored suits that normally defined her workday wardrobe. "Starting today, Flight 218 to Geneva." Anthony confirmed, consulting his tablet. "You'll be in 2A first class. I'm in business class 6C monitoring. Diana Rodriguez will be coordinating from headquarters, watching your live stream." Alex nodded, slipping off her executive blazer and replacing it with the cardigan. She removed her designer watch, replacing it with a simple timepiece that had belonged to her mother. From her drawer, she extracted an old leather bag worn with character rather than branded with status. "The ultimate test of our service isn't how we treat people we recognize as important," she said, her voice carrying the same lesson her mother had taught her growing up in South Side Chicago. "It's how we treat those we think don't matter." Anthony watched as she transformed herself from recognizable executive to anonymous traveler. "Anyone looking at your boarding pass will still see Alexandria Morgan." "Nobody looks at names anymore," she replied. "They look at clothes, at skin color, at perceived status." She smiled slightly. "Besides, flight crew rarely connect passengers to the executive team. They've mostly seen me in corporate videos or at a distance during company events." Her phone buzzed. Diana Rodriguez, head of customer experience, was calling. Alex put her on speaker. "Everything's set," Diana reported. "The monitoring team is ready. We have the secure live stream channel prepared. Anthony has clearance to move between cabins if needed." "And the flight crew?" Alex asked. "Standard rotation," Anthony confirmed. "No one who's worked directly with you. Senior flight attendant is Jennifer Wilson, been with us 12 years. She's known for impeccable service to certain passengers." His emphasis was subtle but clear. "Chief flight attendant James Lawson, 22 years in the industry, last 8 with us after United let him go during restructuring. Captain William Fraser, First Officer Michael Patterson." Alex nodded. "Perfect. Remember, no intervention unless absolutely necessary. I need to experience what our passengers experience, the good and the bad." Anthony frowned. "And if the bad is really bad?" Alex zipped her bag. "Then we'll know exactly what needs fixing." She straightened the CEO, momentarily visible beneath the deliberately ordinary exterior. "This company will stand for dignity, Anthony. For everyone, no matter what they're wearing or what they look like. That's the legacy I want to build." As she headed for the private elevator that would take her to a waiting car, Anthony called after her. "What if they recognize you?" Alex smiled, the kind of smile that had faced down boardrooms of doubting investors. "Then we have a different kind of problem. But either way, we'll learn something valuable." In the car heading to O'Hare, Alex reviewed her notes one last time. The Invisible CEO program had been her brainchild, born after reading a scathing online review from a black passenger claiming discriminatory treatment in first class. The complaint had been handled according to protocol, a voucher issued, an apology emailed, but the underlying issue remained unaddressed. She thought back to the board meeting 3 months ago. Customer experience isn't just about the numbers she had told them, it's about consistency across all demographics. Evan Blackwell, the board chairman, had looked skeptical, his 60 years in the industry etched into the lines of his face. "You're suggesting our own crews might treat passengers differently based on appearance. I'm suggesting we don't know for certain," Alex had responded. "And the only way to know is to see it firsthand. No warnings, no special preparations." The memory of her mother's words echoed in her mind. "Never let them make you feel less than what you are. But sometimes to understand the truth, you have to let them show you who they really are." Now, as the car approached the international terminal, Alex felt a familiar tension. It was the same feeling she'd had walking into venture capital meetings when seeking funding to purchase the airline. The knowledge that her competence would be questioned in ways her white male counterparts never experienced. "We're here," Ms. Morgan, her driver, announced. "Thank you, David," she replied. "Remember, from this moment on, I'm just another passenger. If anyone asks, you dropped off a business traveler." David nodded, understanding the protocol. "Good luck, ma'am." Alex stepped out, shouldering her worn leather bag. The Invisible CEO experiment had begun. "First-class passengers this way, please." Alex heard the announcement as she navigated through O'Hare's bustling international terminal, a cathedral of glass and steel humming with thousands of travelers in constant motion. She observed the subtle dance of status playing out around her, the way airport staff scanned travelers, making split-second judgments about who deserved attention and who didn't. The agent's eyes slid past her cream cardigan and simple slacks, locking instead on a white businessman in an Italian suit with a Rolex gleaming at his wrist. "Good morning, sir. Let me help you with that," the agent offered enthusiastically, rushing to assist with his luxury luggage, a matching set of Rimowa cases that probably cost more than some people's monthly rent. Alex approached the first-class check-in counter, standing patiently as the agent finished tapping at her keyboard without looking up. The counter itself was a statement of exclusivity. Polished mahogany topped with granite, physically separated from the main terminal's chaos by velvet ropes and potted plants. Boarding pass and ID, the woman requested flatly, eyes still on her screen, fingers tapping impatiently on the counter. "Good morning," Alex replied pleasantly, sliding her documentation across the counter, her mother's voice in her head reminding her to always maintain her dignity, especially when others tried to deny it. The agent glanced at her, then down at the first-class ticket, her eyebrows lifting slightly in surprise. She examined Alex's ID more carefully than necessary, comparing the photo to Alex's face multiple times, her eyes narrowing in suspicion. "Is something wrong?" Alex asked. "No," the agent replied, her tone suggesting otherwise. "Just being thorough with our verification process." She returned the documents with considerably less warmth than she'd shown to previous passengers. "Gate B12 boarding in 40 minutes. As Alex moved away, she heard the agent's voice transform completely as she greeted the next passenger, a white woman in designer clothes, with genuine warmth. "Good morning, Mrs. Hamilton. Lovely to see you again. Geneva today. Your usual seat is ready." Alex made a mental note of the contrast as she moved through security with the practiced efficiency of a frequent traveler. Despite her first-class status, no one directed her to the priority line until she quietly showed her boarding pass. The TSA agent looked surprised, then waved her through with a slightly suspicious glance, as if a black woman in simple clothes must have somehow obtained the first-class ticket through illegitimate means. At the gate, Alex observed the pre-boarding rituals. Travelers clustered in unspoken hierarchies, the business travelers with their polished briefcases, the wealthy leisure passengers with designer luggage, the economy travelers looking slightly more harried. She took a seat, pulling out her tablet to begin her observations labeled simply, Service Standards Assessment. A memory surfaced as she typed, entering a luxury car dealership 2 years ago interested in purchasing a new vehicle. The salesman had gravitated toward other customers, leaving her standing alone for nearly 15 minutes before someone finally approached asking if she was waiting for someone. The assumption that she couldn't possibly be a customer herself. When she'd eventually purchased the top-of-the-line model, the salesman had seemed genuinely shocked, asking twice if she was sure about such a significant investment. First-class passengers for Horizon Airways Flight 218 to Geneva may now begin boarding. Alex gathered her belongings, joining the small line forming at the priority lane. Ahead of her stood an older white man in a bespoke suit. She recognized the distinctive cut of Anderson and Shepard, and a white woman dripping in subtle jewelry that probably cost more than some cars. The gate lounge had emptied slightly, the remaining passengers watching the privileged few with expressions ranging from envy to resentment to indifference. Michael Patterson, the first officer, stood near the jet bridge entrance, smiling and occasionally greeting passengers he recognized as frequent flyers. Tall and conventionally handsome, with the perfectly groomed appearance of someone who understood the value of first impressions, he represented the classic image of commercial aviation. His eyes passed over Alex without registering her, then snapped back to the white businessman with enthusiastic recognition. Mr. Foster. Good to see you again, sir. Heading back to Geneva. Indeed, Michael. 3rd time this month, the man replied, his voice carrying the easy confidence of someone accustomed to respect. Safe travels, Sir Patterson replied, then looked at Alex with considerably less interest. As she presented her boarding pass, his eyebrows furrowed slightly, creating a momentary break in his professional veneer. First class, he asked the question itself, revealing his assumption. Yes, Alex replied simply, maintaining her composure despite the familiar sting of being questioned about belonging in premium spaces. He scanned her pass, returning it with a professional but cooler smile than he'd offered to Mr. Foster. Enjoy your flight, he said, the words perfunctory rather than genuine. As Alex walked down the jetway, she made a mental note of the interaction. Not overtly rude, but distinctly different. The subtle messaging that she didn't quite belong. The jetway itself felt like a transitional space, a liminal zone between the democratic chaos of the terminal and the rigid hierarchy of the aircraft cabin that awaited her. At the aircraft door, Jennifer Wilson greeted passengers with practiced efficiency. Her blonde hair was pulled into an immaculate French twist, her makeup perfect, her uniform pristine. At 52, she carried herself with the authority of someone who had spent decades in premium cabins, understanding their unwritten rules and hierarchies. Welcome aboard, she said warmly to Mr. Foster, her entire demeanor lighting up with recognition. Richard, lovely to see you again. Your usual drink ready when you're settled. She reached out briefly, touching his arm in a gesture of familiarity. Thank you, Jennifer. Richard replied with familiar ease, the exchange revealing a comfortable relationship built over countless flights. When Alex approached, Jennifer's smile remained fixed, but her eyes performed the same quick assessment the gate agents had, taking in Alex's simple clothes and worn bag with a barely perceptible shift in expression. Her body language changed subtly. She took a small step back, maintaining a physical distance she hadn't with Richard, her smile tightening at the corners. Welcome, she said, the greeting notably lacking the warmth offered to Richard. No name usage, no personal touch, despite the fact that first-class manifests provided attendance with all passengers' names. Alex made her way to seat 2A, stowing her bag in the overhead compartment. The first-class cabin gleamed with luxury, Hand-stitched leather seats in cream and navy polished wood accents, crystal glassware waiting at each position. The air itself felt different here. Cleaner, rarefied, carrying subtle notes of expensive cologne and the faint citrus fragrance that was part of Horizon Airways' sensory branding. Richard Foster settled into 2B beside her, immediately extracting his laptop without acknowledgement of his seatmate. In his mid-50s, he radiated the confident entitlement of old money and established power. His custom suit, subtle Patek Philippe watch, and monogrammed leather portfolio all communicated a simple message: he belonged here. Alex observed as Jennifer returned, placing a crystal glass of champagne in front of Richard before he'd even asked. "Your usual, Mr. Foster," she said with a genuine smile that crinkled the corners of her eyes. Richard nodded appreciatively. "Thank you, Jennifer. Perfect as always." Jennifer turned to leave without offering Alex a pre-flight beverage. Alex waited a moment, then pressed her call button. Jennifer returned her smile, tightening slightly. A flash of irritation quickly masked by professional training. Yes, she asked less a question than a subtle display of irritation. "Could I have some water, please?" Alex requested politely. "Of course," Jennifer replied, her tone cooler than the water would be. "Once we complete the pre-flight service." Alex nodded, watching as Jennifer proceeded to serve another white passenger a drink immediately afterward, not completing any pre-flight service first, but simply prioritizing certain passengers over others. From across the aisle in 2C, a middle-aged white woman in designer clothes caught the interaction and frowned slightly, seemingly uncomfortable with what she'd witnessed. She made brief eye contact with Alex, a moment of silent acknowledgement passing between them. Behind Alex, a Hispanic man in his early 40s settled into 3A. He caught Alex's eye briefly, a flicker of recognition passing between them, not of her identity, but of the familiar pattern unfolding. His tailored but understated clothing and quiet demeanor suggested someone accustomed to navigating these spaces while being viewed with similar subtle suspicion. As the cabin filled, Alex continued her mental notes. The first-class section was predominantly white, save for herself and the Hispanic man. The flight attendants' body language shifted subtly as they moved through the cabin. More attentive, more solicitous toward certain passengers, more perfunctory with others. Alex thought back to her childhood in Chicago, her mother's voice echoing through time. "They'll try to make you feel small. Don't you ever let them. Your worth isn't determined by how others treat you." Her mother had cleaned hotel rooms for 30 years, encountering daily the same dismissive attitudes Alex now observed as a CEO worth millions. She remembered accompanying her mother to work once as a child, watching how guests spoke to her without making eye contact, as if her mother were an extension of the furniture rather than a human being deserving of basic courtesy. Richard Foster finished a call, finally acknowledging Alex with a brief nod that suggested he was doing her a favor by noticing her existence. "Business or pleasure?" he asked, the standard first-class conversation opener. "A bit of both," Alex replied pleasantly. "And you, meeting with the WTO," he said, name-dropping the World Trade Organization with practiced casualness. "I advise on international finance regulations. They're implementing a new framework based on my recommendations." The subtle message was clear. I am important. I belong here. "Do you?" Interesting, Alex replied. "And what do you do?" he asked, his tone suggesting limited possibilities, perhaps an assistant traveling on behalf of an executive, or maybe the beneficiary of an upgraded ticket. Before Alex could answer, Jennifer returned, interrupting their conversation to lean toward Richard. "Mr. Foster, the chef, prepared the special appetizer you enjoy. I've reserved it for you." "Wonderful, Jennifer. Thank you." The exchange carried an unspoken subtext of belonging and privilege. The exchange complete, Jennifer departed without a glance at Alex. Richard returned to his laptop, evidently deciding Alex wasn't worth further conversation. His body language shifted subtly, angling away from her, creating physical distance that reinforced the social barrier he perceived. From 3A, the Hispanic passenger observed this interaction with a resigned expression Alex recognized all too well, the look of someone witnessing a familiar pattern of behavior. He caught her eye again, offering a small, sympathetic smile that spoke volumes about shared experiences. Jennifer passed by once more this time, addressing the white woman across the aisle. "Ms. Baker, would you care for another glass before takeoff? We have that Veuve Clicquot you enjoyed last time." As the boarding completed and the doors closed, Alex activated the discreet camera in her tablet, beginning the live stream to the monitoring team at headquarters. Phase 1 of the Invisible CEO test was complete. Phase 2, the flight itself, was about to begin. More champagne. Mr. Foster Jennifer's voice carried the perfect blend of professionalism and personal attention as she leaned slightly closer to Richard than strictly necessary. They were 20 minutes into the flight, the seatbelt sign had just turned off, and the cabin service was beginning in earnest. The first-class cabin hummed with the gentle murmur of privileged travel, the subtle click of fine cutlery against china, the delicate clink of crystal, the hushed conversations of passengers accustomed to personal space and attentive service. "Please," Richard replied without looking up from his financial report, extending his glass with the casual expectation of immediate service. Sunlight streamed through the window, catching the amber liquid as Jennifer refilled his glass with practiced precision. Alex observed the interaction while updating her notes on her tablet. The document now contained detailed timestamps of service disparities, noting the exact minutes that had elapsed between Richard receiving attention and her own requests being acknowledged. The leather seat felt cool against her back as she maintained her relaxed, observant posture. So far, the pattern was consistent. White passengers in first class received prompt, warm, personalized service, while Alex experienced delays, cooler interactions, and less attentive care. Nothing overtly discriminatory, nothing that would trigger formal complaints, but a persistent, unmistakable difference in treatment that created an atmosphere of subtle exclusion. "Water?" Jennifer finally asked Alex, placing a plastic cup rather than the crystal glasses other passengers received. Her body language was revealing. She stood further away from Alex than from other passengers, maintained minimal eye contact, and her smile never reached her eyes. "Thank you," Alex replied, maintaining her composure. "Could I also have some ice, please?" Jennifer's smile tightened the corner of her mouth, twitching slightly. "Of course. I'll bring that when I come back around." Her tone implied that Alex's request was somehow burdensome despite being entirely standard. She moved to the passenger across the aisle, immediately providing a full service without prompting Ms. Baker. "Here's your sparkling water with lime, just how you like it." Jennifer's entire demeanor transformed. Her shoulders relaxed. Her smile became genuine. Her voice warmed. Alex noted this interaction in her assessment document. 20 minutes later, she still had no ice. The contrast wasn't subtle. It was a clear message about who deserved attentive service and who didn't. From seat 3A, Gabriel Martinez observed the disparities with quiet attention, during a moment when the flight attendants were occupied in the galley. He leaned forward slightly. "They always forget we exist until we remind them," he said quietly, his voice carrying just enough for Alex to hear. His accent hinted at a cosmopolitan background, the slight musical cadence of a native Spanish speaker who had mastered multiple languages. She turned, offering a small smile of acknowledgement. "You fly this route often." "Every month," Gabriel confirmed. "Executive for Medina Pharmaceuticals. You'd think after 2 years they'd remember my name or my drink preference." He nodded toward Richard. "But they never forget his." "I'm Alexandria," she offered. "Gabriel," he replied. "Good to have company in the invisible section." There was no bitterness in his tone, just the wry humor of someone who had learned to navigate these situations without losing his dignity. Gabriel's expression shifted to one of subtle warning as he noticed someone approaching. Their conversation was interrupted as Rachel Thompson, a younger flight attendant with auburn hair, approached with fresh beverages. Unlike Jennifer, Rachel made eye contact with both Alex and Gabriel, her service more consistent across passengers. "Can I get either of you anything?" she asked, her tone genuinely solicitous. At 29, she lacked the hardened biases that seemed to have calcified in Jennifer over decades. "Some ice for my water would be wonderful," Alex replied. Right away, Rachel promised and actually delivered moments later, the small crystal bowl of ice cubes arriving with a cocktail napkin and a genuine smile. "Thank you, Rachel," Alex said deliberately, using the name from her badge. Rachel smiled, seemingly surprised at being addressed personally. "You're welcome. Let me know if you need anything else." She hesitated, then added in a lower voice, "I apologize for the delay." As she moved away, Gabriel commented quietly, "The younger ones are sometimes better. Haven't fully absorbed the culture yet." Alex nodded, making another note. Cultural patterns rather than individual biases, precisely what the Invisible CEO program was designed to identify. The disparities weren't just about Jennifer's personal prejudices. They reflected broader organizational norms that had developed and persisted because they went unchallenged. Richard Foster closed his laptop, finally turning his attention to the cabin around him. His gaze settled on Alex, briefly assessing her with the practiced eye of someone accustomed to categorizing people by their utility to him. His cologne, expensive but not ostentatious, wafted across the small space between them. First time in first class, he asked, his tone suggesting he already knew the answer. "No," Alex replied, simply refusing to elaborate or justify her presence. "Ah," he said, clearly not believing her. "Business meeting in Geneva." His expression was that of someone humoring a person they perceived as out of their depth. "Something like that," she answered, maintaining her pleasant demeanor while continuing her assessment notes. She noticed his eyes tracking her tablet screen with growing curiosity. Richard noticed her typing. "Important work, I'd say." "So?" Alex replied, the irony of his interest in her tablet while dismissing her presence not lost on her. Jennifer returned, noticing their conversation. Her eyes narrowed slightly as she assessed the interaction, seemingly displeased to see Richard engaging with Alex at all. "Mr. Foster, would you prefer to be moved to a quieter seat? 1A is available if you'd like to work without distraction." The implication that Alex was the distraction hung in the air, along with the assumption that Richard couldn't possibly be genuinely interested in conversing with someone like Alex. "I'm fine here, Jennifer," Richard replied, "but perhaps a refresh on my scotch." Immediately, she promised, then left without acknowledging Alex. Alex made another entry in her assessment. Behind her, Gabriel caught her eye in the reflection of the window, a knowing look passing between them. The cabin lights reflected off the polished surfaces, creating an atmosphere of rarefied luxury that contrasted sharply with the subtle dynamics of exclusion playing out within it. The cabin settled into pre-meal service routine. Alex watched as Jennifer conducted a detailed conversation with every white passenger about their meal preferences, spending several minutes discussing wine pairings with Richard. "The Bordeaux has lovely notes of black currant that complement the beef perfectly, Mr. Foster," she explained, leaning close to pour a small taste for him. "But if you prefer something with more structure, the Barolo is exceptional this month." When she finally reached Alex, her approach changed markedly. Her posture stiffened, she maintained maximum distance, and her expression became mask-like. "Chicken or pasta?" she asked curtly, no elaboration on preparations or accompaniments. "Could you tell me how the chicken is prepared?" Alex asked. Jennifer's expression tightened, almost imperceptibly. Her lips pressed into a thin line before she responded. "It's a standard airline preparation, chicken with sauce." Alex nodded. "And the pasta, also standard, pasta with sauce." Jennifer's foot tapped slightly, her body language communicating impatience she would never show to Richard. "I'll try the chicken." "Thank you," Alex replied. "Drink?" Jennifer asked, already beginning to move away. "Red wine would be nice. What options do you have?" Jennifer's smile remained fixed, but her eyes hardened slightly. House red or white? Alex noted that Richard had been offered a choice between a Bordeaux and a Burgundy by name and vintage. The disparity wasn't subtle. It was a clear message about who deserved detailed information and personalized service and who didn't. "The red, please," Alex said simply. Jennifer nodded and moved to Gabriel, providing him with the same abbreviated service. Minimal information, minimal engagement, and a clear message that his presence was being tolerated rather than welcomed. As she walked away, Richard leaned slightly toward Alex. "The flight attendants can get overwhelmed with too many questions. Best to keep it simple." His tone carried the condescension of someone explaining the rules of a space to an outsider. "I appreciate the tip," Alex replied, her composure unruffled. She returned to her assessment document, noting not just the service disparities, but the cabin dynamics, the way first-class passengers unconsciously reinforced the hierarchy, the subtle social alliances forming along racial and class lines, the unspoken rules of belonging that she and Gabriel were perceived to be violating. When the meals arrived, the pattern continued. Richard received his tray with careful explanation of each element, Jennifer practically hovering to ensure his satisfaction. "The reduction sauce is made with a 30-year port Mr. Foster. The chef prepared it specially this month." The white passengers across the aisle received similar attention, with Jennifer taking time to arrange their napkins and offer freshly ground pepper. When Jennifer reached Alex, she placed the tray down with considerably less care, nearly sloshing the wine. "Chicken," she stated flatly, already turning away. Alex looked down to find not the chicken entree she'd requested, but a cold sandwich in plastic wrap, the kind typically served in economy during short domestic flights, not the premium international service that first-class passengers had paid for. The contrast was impossible to miss. Around her, white passengers enjoyed steaming plates of gourmet meals. Before her sat a sandwich that looked like an afterthought. "Excuse me," Alex said, her voice quiet but clear. "I believe there's been a mistake with my meal. I'm sorry, but we've run out of first-class meals for your seat." Jennifer's words hung in the air, sharp and deliberate. Alex glanced around the cabin where every other passenger enjoyed their carefully plated gourmet meals. The scent of truffle and seared beef wafted through the cabin, making the plastic-wrapped sandwich before her seem even more obviously out of place. The flight attendant's eyes held a challenge, daring Alex to make a scene. "That's interesting," Alex replied, her voice measured despite the familiar sting of humiliation rising in her chest. "I can see several meal trays still on the cart." She gestured toward the galley where the meal cart clearly displayed at least 3 more covered plates waiting to be served. Jennifer's smile tightened the corners of her mouth, drawing into a thin line. Her eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. "Those are reserved for passengers with specific dietary requirements." Her hands clasped in front of her, a defensive posture that contradicted her attempt at a professional demeanor. Richard Foster paused mid-bite, watching the exchange with barely concealed amusement. A droplet of red wine sauce clung to his bottom lip as he observed the confrontation unfolding beside him. From across the aisle, Thomas Baker, the older white man in seat 1A, looked up with a frown, his fork suspended in the air. "I don't recall being asked about dietary requirements," Alex noted calmly. Unlike other passengers who received detailed meal consultations, she maintained eye contact with Jennifer, refusing to be the first to look away. Jennifer's professional mask slipped for just a moment, revealing irritation. Her right eyebrow twitched slightly, a micro-expression of annoyance she quickly suppressed. "If you'd like to eat, this is your option." She gestured dismissively at the sandwich. "We're very busy with service." The subtext was clear. "Don't make trouble. Accept what you're given." The cabin fell silent. A few passengers glanced over. Others pretended sudden fascination with their meals. The atmosphere crystallized into something hard and cold, the unspoken acknowledgement of what was really happening. The only sounds were the gentle clink of silverware against fine china and the distant hum of the engines. Alex set the sandwich on her tray without touching it. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the controlled anger familiar to anyone who had faced such treatment. As CEO of Horizon Airways, she had navigated boardrooms filled with men who doubted her competence based solely on her gender and race. But at 35,000 feet, the insult felt more intimate, more personal. Behind her, Gabriel Martinez watched with resigned recognition. "Happened to me last month," he said quietly, leaning forward so his words carried only to Alex. Suddenly, they were out of the special dessert everyone else received. His tone carried the weariness of someone who had seen this script play out countless times. Rachel Thompson, the younger flight attendant, approached with uncertainty in her eyes, having witnessed the exchange from the galley. Her hands fidgeted with her serving towel, betraying her discomfort with the situation. "Is everything all right?" she asked, low enough that Jennifer couldn't hear from the galley. "No," Alex replied simply. "It isn't." Her calm demeanor remained intact, but her eyes conveyed the seriousness of the situation. Rachel hesitated, conflict evident in her expression, the desire to do right battling with the fear of challenging a senior colleague. She glanced toward the galley where Jennifer was speaking with James Lawson, the chief flight attendant, both of them occasionally looking in Alex's direction. "Let me see what I can do," Rachel offered, disappearing toward the galley. Richard Foster's voice broke the uncomfortable silence. "The sandwiches aren't bad, actually. I've had them when upgrading from business." He cut into his perfectly prepared filet mignon as he spoke, the juices running pink onto the white porcelain. The attempted consolation only highlighted the disparity more starkly, the assumption that Alex should be grateful for whatever she received while he expected and received impeccable service as his due. "I understand," Alex replied, her tone calm and deliberate, "but I won't forget this." She lifted her phone, angling it to capture the contrast between her sandwich and Richard's gourmet meal, then began typing notes. The documentation wasn't just for show. Each interaction was being recorded, cataloged, and transmitted to her team at headquarters. The cabin lights reflected off her screen as she methodically documented the incident. Jennifer returned, noticing Alex's phone. Her expression hardened. "What are you doing?" she demanded, her tone sharper than she'd use with any other first-class passenger. "Documenting my experience," Alex replied. "For future reference. Recording is not permitted during I'm not recording video," Alex clarified, though the live stream through her tablet continued unnoticed. "I'm taking notes on my customer experience." Jennifer's expression flickered between irritation and uncertainty. "Well, as I explained, we've run out of proper meals for your seat." Alex met her gaze directly. "My seat. What exactly is different about my seat compared to others in first class?" The question hung in the air, its real meaning unmistakable. Jennifer retreated, slightly professional mask slipping back into place. Her posture stiffened as she realized she might have overstepped. "Nothing. It's just a matter of inventory management." From seat 1A, Thomas Baker spoke up unexpectedly. At 62, with silver hair and the confident bearing of a retired judge, he commanded attention when he chose to speak. "I couldn't help overhearing. Seems odd that you'd run out of meals in first class. Never experienced that in 30 years of flying." His gaze was steady, his tone making it clear he didn't believe Jennifer's explanation for a moment. Jennifer's smile grew strained, a bead of perspiration forming at her temple, despite the cabin's perfect climate control. "It occasionally happens when passengers make last-minute changes." "I made no changes," Alex stated calmly, "and I confirmed my first-class booking 3 weeks ago." She maintained her composure, refusing to escalate the situation despite the obvious discrimination. Rachel reappeared with a proper meal tray. "I found this in the galley," she said, carefully placing it before Alex. "There seems to have been a mix-up." Her eyes briefly met Alex's, communicating silent support. The plate contained the same gourmet chicken dish others had received, complete with the delicate garnish and sauce. Jennifer's eyes flashed with barely concealed anger at the younger attendant. The muscles in her jaw tightened visibly. "Rachel, I need you in the galley. Now." Her tone left no room for argument. As they retreated, Richard leaned toward Alex. "You shouldn't make a fuss. The crew remembers difficult passengers." His tone was conspiratorial, as if offering valuable insider advice. "I'm sure they do," Alex replied evenly, "just as passengers remember discriminatory treatment." The word landed with precision. Richard's expression shifted from condescension to discomfort. He straightened in his seat, his posture suddenly more formal. "That's a serious accusation." "It's a serious matter," Alex countered, her voice still measured, but carrying a note of authority that seemed to catch Richard off guard. She cut into her chicken, finally able to enjoy the same meal as other passengers. Gabriel spoke from behind them. "It happens every day. Most of us just stay quiet because complaining gets you labeled as difficult or playing the race card." His expression was resigned but resolute, having decided to add his voice to the conversation. Richard turned, frowning at this unexpected alliance forming. "I'm sure the crew treats everyone equally. They're professionals." "Are you?" Alex asked, meeting his gaze directly. "Watching this unfold, did you see equal treatment?" Richard's eyes darted away, unable to maintain contact. The question had struck home, forcing him to confront his own complicity in the system. Before Richard could answer, Jennifer returned, having apparently disciplined Rachel in the galley. Her smile was back in place, but her eyes were cold like frozen glass. The temperature in the cabin seemed to drop a few degrees with her return. "Is there anything else I can help you with?" she asked Alex, the question itself a challenge. "Yes," Alex replied calmly. "I'd like to speak with the chief flight attendant." Jennifer's smile faltered. "I'm the senior flight attendant on this flight." "I understand. But I'd like to speak with your supervisor." A flash of uncertainty crossed Jennifer's face. Passengers rarely asked for the chief flight attendant, a position higher than the senior flight attendant responsible for the entire cabin crew. Her fingers fidgeted with the cuff of her uniform sleeve, betraying her discomfort. "James is busy with preparations for landing in 6 hours," Jennifer deflected. "Perhaps I can address your concern." "My concern," Alex replied, "is that I've received markedly different service than other passengers in the same class. I've been given a sandwich while others received gourmet meals, served water in plastic, while others received crystal, and experienced consistently dismissive treatment." Jennifer's professional demeanor slipped again, her nostrils flaring slightly with suppressed anger. "If you're suggesting I'm not suggesting anything, I'm stating observable facts, and I would like to discuss them with the chief flight attendant." The standoff was interrupted by a message over the intercom. "Jennifer, please report to the mid-cabin galley." The voice belonged to James Lawson, the chief flight attendant, who had evidently been alerted to the situation. Jennifer's face tightened, a muscle jumping in her jaw. "I'll be right back." She said the words clipped. As she walked away, the cabin hummed with tension. Several passengers were now openly watching the typical first-class pretense of privacy abandoned in the face of emerging drama. The afternoon sun slanted through the windows, casting dramatic shadows across the scene. Thomas Baker caught Alex's eye from across the aisle. "Good for you," he said quietly. "I've been flying this route monthly for years. Never seen anything like that sandwich situation." Alex nodded her thanks, continuing to document the interaction on her tablet, the live stream capturing everything for the monitoring team at headquarters. In business class, Anthony Rivera watched the feed on his phone, his expression darkening at what he witnessed. 6 rows behind the unfolding situation, Anthony sent a message to Diana Rodriguez. "Confirm you're seeing this." The response came immediately. "Recording everything. Keep monitoring. No intervention unless she signals. Rachel approached cautiously, refilling Alex's water in a proper glass this time. "I apologize for the confusion with your meal," she said, her voice low. "It wasn't right." "Thank you, Rachel," Alex replied. "But this isn't about the meal anymore." Rachel nodded, understanding. Her eyes carried a weight beyond her years, the burden of witnessing injustice while feeling powerless to address it. "James is coming. He's very protective of Jennifer." Her tone conveyed a clear warning. "How long have they worked together?" Alex asked. Rachel glanced around to ensure no one was listening. 15 years. They came from United together. They control most of the international route assignments. The implication was clear. They wielded significant influence over other flight attendants' careers. The warning was clear. The confrontation was about to escalate. Alex took a deep breath, hearing her mother's voice again. "When they make you feel small, stand tall. When they take away your respect, you still get to choose how you respond." She straightened in her seat, calm but resolute, as James Lawson made his way down the aisle toward her, his expression already set in diplomatic damage control. The real test was about to begin. "Is there a problem here?" James Lawson loomed over seat 2A, his voice pitched low but carrying that distinctive tone of authority meant to intimidate rather than resolve. At 56, the chief flight attendant had the polished appearance of someone who had spent decades in premium cabins, his silver hair perfectly coiffed, his uniform immaculate. Standing at over 6 feet tall, he used his height deliberately positioning himself, so Alex had to crane her neck to meet his gaze. "Yes," Alex replied, meeting his gaze directly despite the uncomfortable angle. "There appears to be an issue with consistent service standards in first class." James glanced at Jennifer, who stood slightly behind him with arms crossed defensively. A silent communication passed between them, the unspoken coordination of longtime allies. Jennifer's lips were pressed into a thin line, her eyes darting between Alex and her tablet. "Jennifer is one of our most experienced flight attendants. I'm sure there's been a misunderstanding." His tone was smooth, practiced, the voice of someone accustomed to diffusing situations with authority rather than accountability. His cologne, sandalwood and amber, created an olfactory extension of his presence. "The misunderstanding," Alex explained calmly, "is why I received a sandwich while everyone else received the advertised first-class meal. Why I was served water in plastic while others received crystal. Why my call button was ignored for 17 minutes while others received immediate attention." James's expression remained professional, but his eyes hardened. A tiny muscle twitched at the corner of his right eye, a tell of controlled anger. Service timing can vary during busy periods. "Ms." He glanced at her seat assignment. "Morgan. As for the meal, occasionally inventory management requires substitutions." "For specific seats?" Alex questioned. "Because Mr. Foster received his meal without issue, as did everyone else in first class." She gestured around the cabin where other passengers were finishing their gourmet meals. Richard shifted uncomfortably beside her, suddenly finding his dessert fascinating. The silver spoon clinked nervously against fine china as he avoided meeting anyone's gaze. "I understand you're upset," James continued, his tone suggesting she was being unreasonable. "But making accusations doesn't improve anyone's flight experience." "I've made no accusations," Alex corrected him. "I've stated observable facts about disparate treatment." Gabriel spoke up from behind them. "I've witnessed the same pattern on multiple flights. It's not a coincidence who gets the inventory management issues." His voice was calm but firm, adding unexpected support to Alex's position. James's smile tightened. "Sir, this doesn't concern you." The dismissal was instant and absolute. "It absolutely concerns me," Gabriel countered. "Because next time I'll be the one with the sandwich." His fingers tapped a light rhythm on his armrest, the only outward sign of his tension. Thomas Baker leaned forward from 1A. the leather seat creaking slightly as he shifted his weight. "I fly this route twice monthly, Mr. Lawson. I've never once seen a first-class passenger served a sandwich while others received proper meals. It's an embarrassment to the airline." James seemed momentarily thrown by the unexpected allies emerging, particularly from an older white passenger he'd clearly categorized as a natural ally. His confident stance faltered slightly, weight shifting to his back foot. "I appreciate your concern, Mr. Baker," James replied, his tone noticeably warmer than when addressing Alex or Gabriel. "Rest assured we'll review our service protocols. Now, if we could all return to enjoying the flight." "I'm not enjoying the flight," Alex interrupted calmly. "And I don't believe this is about inventory management or service timing. This is about who is deemed deserving of proper service and who isn't." Jennifer stepped forward. "That's completely unfair. We treat all passengers equally." Her cheeks had flushed a bright pink, her practiced composure cracking under the direct challenge. Alex raised an eyebrow. "Would you be willing to review the cabin security footage of this flight to confirm that statement?" A flicker of uncertainty crossed Jennifer's face. Her eyes widened slightly, then narrowed as she recovered. Her hand moved unconsciously to adjust her collar, a nervous habit, revealing her discomfort. "Security footage is for safety purposes only," James interjected smoothly. "Not customer service disputes." Alex nodded. "Then perhaps we could discuss the Horizon Airways service guarantee, the one that promises consistent premium experience for all first-class passengers." She reached into her bag, extracting a leather portfolio containing the airline's service standards, a document she herself had approved 2 years earlier. James's professional facade didn't crack, but his eyes narrowed slightly. The cabin lights reflected off his silver tie clip, a miniature of the Horizon Airways wings that marked 20 years of service. "Ms. Morgan, what exactly are you looking for here? An apology? A voucher for future travel?" "Neither," Alex replied. "I'm looking for acknowledgement that what happened isn't acceptable and assurance that it won't happen to other passengers. We always strive to—" "Not platitudes," Alex interrupted. "Concrete acknowledgement." She remained seated, but somehow managed to command the space, refusing to be diminished by James's looming presence. James's patience visibly thinned. A vein pulsed at his temple and his breathing became more measured, the controlled response of someone working to maintain their composure. "Ms. Morgan, I understand you're upset, but disrupting the cabin service doesn't help anyone. If you'd like to file a formal complaint, you can do so through our customer service department after landing." "I'm documenting the situation now," Alex replied, indicating her tablet. "For accuracy." Jennifer noticed the tablet was still actively recording. "You can't record flight crew without permission," she said sharply. "It's against regulations." Her hand moved as if to reach for the device, then stopped, recognizing the boundary violation that would represent. "I'm taking notes," Alex clarified, though the live stream continued undetected, "which is permitted." James straightened to his full height, shoulders squaring beneath his tailored uniform. "Ms. Morgan, I need to be clear. If your behavior continues to disrupt our service, we may need to take further steps." His right hand rested lightly on his service phone, a subtle reminder of his authority to call security. The threat hung in the air, deliberately vague but unmistakable. What behavior would that be? Alex asked, her voice still calm. "Requesting the same service others receive, documenting disparities, speaking quietly with my fellow passengers." James didn't answer directly. His jaw tightened momentarily before he forced a thin smile. "Jennifer will be your primary flight attendant for the remainder of the journey. I suggest keeping requests simple and reasonable." The implication was clear: know your place. As James turned to leave, he paused by Richard's seat. "Mr. Foster, my apologies for the disruption. Can I bring you another scotch to compensate for the disturbance?" That would be appreciated. James, Richard replied, the exchange highlighting exactly the disparity Alex had identified. When James departed, Jennifer remained her professional smile masking barely concealed hostility. Will there be anything else? She asked Alex. No, thank you, Alex replied. I've seen everything I needed to see. Jennifer moved away, but not before muttering just loud enough to be heard. Some people just don't understand proper first-class etiquette. Gabriel leaned forward again. It's getting worse, he observed quietly. Now that you've challenged them. I noticed, Alex replied, continuing her documentation. Rachel approached cautiously with fresh drinks, her expression conflicted. Her hands trembled slightly as she placed a proper crystal glass before Alex. I'm so sorry, she whispered the words barely audible. It's not your doing, Alex assured her. They're watching me now, Rachel replied under her breath. James told me to focus on other passengers. The meaning was clear. Rachel was being warned to stop providing equitable service to Alex. The wine service that followed demonstrated exactly how the pattern had intensified. Jennifer lavished attention on white passengers discussing vintages and offering tastings. The crystal glasses sparkled in the cabin lighting as she poured with theatrical flourish for Richard and Thomas. When she reached Alex, she practically slammed the glass down, splashing red wine onto the tray. The crimson liquid spread across the white linen napkin, creating a stark visual representation of the tension in the cabin. Oops, she said, without a hint of genuine regret. Let me get you a napkin. She returned with a single cocktail napkin insufficient for the spreading liquid. Throughout the next hour, the pattern became increasingly blatant. Alex's call button was ignored entirely, the small light above her seat blinking unanswered, while others received immediate attention. When she requested coffee, Jennifer claimed they were temporarily out, only to serve it to Richard moments later, the rich aroma wafting across the narrow aisle between them. Jennifer's offers to refresh drinks skipped over Alex and Gabriel entirely, as if their seats contained empty space rather than paying passengers. The cabin became a theater of exclusion, with every service interaction reinforcing the message you don't belong here. The atmosphere in the cabin had shifted. Some passengers, like Thomas Baker, watched with growing discomfort, occasionally making eye contact with Alex in silent support. Others pretended not to notice the willful blindness of privilege, allowing them to ignore the dynamics playing out before them. Richard Foster alternated between discomfort and subtle satisfaction at receiving preferential treatment. Alex maintained her composure throughout documenting each incident in precise detail. The live stream continued uninterrupted to headquarters, where Diana Rodriguez and her team watched with growing concern, cataloging each violation of company service standards. In business class, Anthony Rivera monitored the feed on his phone, his jaw tightening with each new incident. The elegant cabin that normally represented Horizon Airways' premium service had been transformed into a battleground of subtle bias and retaliation. The text from Diana reflected his own thoughts. This is worse than we anticipated. 3 hours into the flight, as the cabin lights dimmed for passengers to rest, Jennifer approached Alex one final time. The reduced lighting cast dramatic shadows across her face, highlighting the tension in her expression. Some feedback for future travel, she said, her voice honeyed with false helpfulness. First class has certain unspoken expectations. Not everyone is comfortable in this environment. Perhaps business class would be more appropriate for your next journey. The statement, delivered with a smile but laced with unmistakable meaning, was the clearest articulation yet of what had been communicated through 100 small actions. You don't belong here. Alex met her gaze steadily. Thank you for making that so explicit, Jennifer. It's very helpful for my documentation. Jennifer's smile faltered. I'm only trying to improve your experience. No, Alex replied quietly. You're trying to preserve a space where people who look like me are made to feel unwelcome, and you're doing so using company resources and while representing this airline." For a moment, Jennifer's mask slipped, completely raw animosity flashing across her features. Her eyes widened, nostrils flared, and lips parted in momentary shock at being so directly confronted. Then the professional veneer snapped back into place. "I'll leave you to rest," she said stiffly, retreating to the galley. Gabriel caught Alex's eye in the darkened cabin. "I've never seen anyone stand their ground like that," he said quietly. "Most of us just endure it." "No one should have to," Alex replied. As the cabin settled into darkness, Alex continued her silent documentation, the tablet's soft glow illuminating her determined expression. In 6 hours, they would land in Geneva. But the real destination was becoming clear, a confrontation that would either transform Horizon Airways or reveal its deepest failings. Anthony messaged Diana one more time. Green light for contingency plan if needed. The response came immediately. Confirmed. Chairman Blackwell has been briefed. Full support authorized. I'm going to need you to stop recording immediately. Jennifer's voice cut through the dimmed first-class cabin, startling several passengers awake. 3 hours had passed the flight halfway to Geneva, and the senior flight attendant had apparently reached her breaking point. She stood in the aisle, backlit by the galley lights, her silhouette rigid with tension. The ambient cabin sounds, the gentle hum of engines, the whisper of air circulation, seemed to fade into the background as all attention focused on this confrontation. Alex looked up from her tablet, where she continued documenting the ongoing service disparities. The screen's blue light illuminated her face in the darkened cabin. "As I've explained, I'm taking notes on my experience. You're recording?" Jennifer insisted, her voice rising. Her finger jabbed accusingly toward the tablet. "Multiple passengers have expressed concerns about privacy violations." Her chest rose and fell rapidly, the controlled breathing of someone working to maintain a professional demeanor while internally seething. Alex glanced around the cabin. No one appeared concerned. Most passengers looked confused by the sudden confrontation. Some had been sleeping eye masks pushed up as they oriented themselves to the unexpected disturbance. "That's not accurate," Alex replied calmly. "I'm documenting my personal experience as a customer, which is permitted under your own policies." She didn't raise her voice, maintaining the same measured tone she'd used throughout the flight. James Lawson appeared behind Jennifer, his expression stern. The soft cabin lighting cast dramatic shadows across his features, deepening the lines around his mouth and eyes. "Ms. Morgan, we've received complaints about disruptive behavior," from whom Alex challenged. Richard Foster shifted uncomfortably beside her. A bead of sweat had formed at his temple despite the cabin's perfect temperature regulation. His eyes darted away when Alex glanced in his direction. Alex understood immediately. He had likely complained uncomfortable with the documenting of his preferential treatment. "That's confidential," James replied, straightening his already perfect tie. "But as chief flight attendant, I have authority to address situations that create discomfort for other passengers. The only discomfort," Thomas Baker interjected from 1A, his voice gruff with sleep but firm with conviction, "is watching how this lady has been treated for the past 3 hours. It's embarrassing." He had removed his reading glasses, polishing them absently as he spoke, a nervous habit betraying his discomfort with the escalating situation. James ignored him, focusing on Alex with laser intensity. "I need you to power down your electronic devices now." "On what grounds?" Alex asked. "Other passengers are using tablets and laptops." She gestured toward a white woman across the aisle who was openly watching a movie on her iPad. "Security concerns," James stated flatly. "And if you refuse to comply, I'll be forced to take further action." The threat hung in the air, deliberate and ominous. The cabin had gone completely silent, the background noise of the aircraft suddenly noticeable in the tense stillness. What action would that be? Alex asked, her voice remaining measured despite the escalation. We have air marshals on board. James said, the implication clear. His hand rested on his service phone thumb, hovering over the call button, and security will meet the aircraft in Geneva. Gabriel leaned forward, the leather seat creaking softly with his movement. Are you threatening her? For taking notes? His accent became slightly more pronounced with his rising indignation. Sir, please remain in your seat, James snapped. This doesn't concern you. It absolutely concerns me, Gabriel replied, and every other passenger witnessing this. He gestured around the cabin where several travelers now sat upright, fully engaged in the unfolding drama. The confrontation had now drawn the attention of the entire first-class cabin. Several passengers had begun recording discreetly on their phones, their screens creating small islands of light in the dimmed environment. Final warning. James stated, his voice dropping to a dangerous register. Power down your devices and cease your disruptive documentation, or I will be forced to take official action. Alex maintained her composure. I'd like to speak with the captain. James's expression hardened. The captain is flying the aircraft. He's delegated cabin authority to me. His posture conveyed absolute certainty in his dominance of the situation. Nevertheless, I'm requesting to speak with him, or to send him a written message regarding this situation. Alex's voice remained calm, but carried an unmistakable note of authority that seemed to momentarily unsettle James. That won't be possible, James replied dismissively. Rachel approached cautiously from the galley. Her uniform was slightly rumpled, suggesting she'd been resting during her break period. James, perhaps we should return to your duties, Rachel. He cut her off sharply. Rachel hesitated, conflict evident in her expression. I don't think company policy supports this approach. Her voice trembled slightly, but she stood her ground. James turned to her, voice low but harsh. Do you want to work this route again ever? Because I make the crew assignments. He leaned closer to Rachel, using his height to intimidate. Your probationary period isn't over yet. The threat silenced Rachel, who retreated with an apologetic glance toward Alex. Her shoulders slumped in defeat as she disappeared into the galley. James turned back to Alex. Now, will you comply voluntarily, or do we need to escalate this situation? Alex met his gaze steadily. I will continue documenting my experience as a paying first-class passenger. If you choose to escalate based on that lawful activity, that will become part of my documentation as well. Jennifer stepped closer. Some people just don't know when to stop making a scene, she said loudly enough for the entire cabin to hear. First class has standards of behavior. Her hands were clasped so tightly her knuckles had turned white. Yes, it does, Alex agreed. Professional service delivered consistently to all passengers regardless of appearance or background. That's the standard in your own company manual, section 17.3, paragraph 4. She quoted the policy verbatim, a policy she herself had authored. Jennifer's eyes widened slightly at the specific reference to internal policy. Her gaze darted to James, a flicker of uncertainty crossing her features. How would you know that she asked, then immediately regretted the question? Richard Foster finally spoke up. Perhaps everyone should calm down. We're all trying to have a peaceful flight. His voice carried the practiced mediation tone of someone accustomed to diffusing business conflicts. Some more than others, Thomas Baker commented dryly. I've never seen crew behave this way toward a passenger who wasn't being abusive or intoxicated. He had fully committed to the confrontation. Now his earlier discomfort transformed into indignation. James straightened his jacket. Mr. Baker, with all due respect, you don't have all the information. I have what I've observed for the past 3 hours, Thomas replied. And I'm deeply concerned by what I've seen. His voice carried the authoritative tone of his years on the bench, a man accustomed to rendering judgment. James seemed momentarily thrown by the lack of support from the white male passengers he clearly expected to back him up. The cabin's social hierarchy was fragmenting before his eyes. He turned back to Alex, regrouping. "This is your final opportunity to comply voluntarily. Power down your devices now." Alex remained calm. "I understand you're trying to intimidate me into silence. It won't work. I have the right to document my experience." James's professional mask slipped, revealing momentary fury. His face flushed red from the collar up a vein pulsing visibly at his temple. "That's it. I'm contacting the captain to arrange for security to meet us in Geneva. You'll be detained for interfering with crew members and flight operations." "On what specific grounds?" Alex asked, still maintaining her composure. "Failure to comply with crew instructions causing disturbance to other passengers and unauthorized recording of flight operations." James counted off the charges on his fingers, his tone suggesting the matter was settled. "I've complied with all safety instructions," Alex countered. "I've spoken in normal tones while being publicly confronted by you and Jennifer, and I've taken notes on my customer experience, which is permitted." She looked around the cabin. "Would anyone here say I've been disruptive?" Several passengers shook their heads. One elderly woman near the window said clearly, "She's been nothing but polite." James leaned closer, lowering his voice so only Alex could hear. "No one will take your word over mine and Jennifer's. We have decades of experience and spotless records." His breath smelled of mint mouthwash, masking the coffee beneath. "The system is designed to believe us, not you." The naked threat, that their status would automatically override her account regardless of facts, hung in the air between them. It was the most honest statement he'd made, revealing the fundamental power imbalance he believed protected him from consequences. Gabriel had heard enough. "I'm a witness," he stated firmly, "and I'll provide a statement to any authority about what I've observed today. So will I." Thomas Baker added, "This is beyond unprofessional." He reached for his phone, typing rapidly. "I'm documenting this as well." James straightened, clearly reassessing the situation. The dynamics had shifted. What should have been a simple exercise of authority over a difficult passenger had transformed into a multi-witness confrontation with digital evidence. "We'll let the authorities in Geneva sort this out." As he turned to leave, Alex spoke one more time, her voice quiet but clear. "Before you file that report, you might want to check who you're filing it against." James paused, turning back with a dismissive expression. "Does that matter?" "It might," Alex replied simply. She held his gaze steadily, neither threatening nor backing down. Something in her tone gave James pause, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his features. His eyes narrowed as he studied her more carefully, trying to place why her confidence seemed so unshakable. Then he shook it off, striding back toward the galley with Jennifer in tow, their whispered conversation barely audible. "She's bluffing," Jennifer insisted. "Just trying to intimidate us." Probably James agreed. "But check the manifest again. Full details." Rachel approached cautiously once they were out of sight. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, genuine distress in her voice. "This isn't right. It's not your fault," Alex assured her. "They're serious about having you detained in Geneva," Rachel warned. "James is filling out the paperwork now. He's citing federal aviation regulations about crew interference." Alex nodded. "Thank you for the information. I tried to say something, but—" Rachel's voice trailed off, her gaze dropping to the floor. "I understand," Alex said gently. "The system makes it dangerous to speak up." As Rachel retreated, Gabriel leaned forward again. "This is insane. They're going to try to have you arrested for documenting racism." "They're trying to," Alex corrected calmly, continuing her notes. In business class, Anthony Rivera watched the live stream with growing concern. The cabin lighting cast a blue glow across his troubled features. He messaged Diana. "They're escalating to detention. Time for intervention." Diana's response was immediate. "Not yet. She hasn't signaled. Captain Fraser has been alerted to monitor the situation. Stand by for possible action." Richard Foster studied Alex with new curiosity. "You seem remarkably calm for someone about to be detained by Swiss authorities." "I have nothing to fear from the truth," Alex replied simply. "Truth is subjective in these situations," Richard commented. "It's your word against the entire crew." His tone suggested he'd seen this scenario play out before, always in favor of institutional power. "No," Alex countered. "Treatment is subjective. Truth is documented." She held up her tablet briefly. "And documentation changes everything." She returned to her tablet, continuing her meticulous notes as the confrontation entered its next phase. The live stream continued transmitting every word, every action to the increasingly concerned executive team at Horizon Airways headquarters. The battle lines were drawn, and for the first time, James and Jennifer appeared to realize they might not be holding all the cards. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain William Fraser. I've been informed of a situation in the first-class cabin. We'll be experiencing some minor turbulence, so please return to your seats and fasten your seatbelts while we assess the conditions." The announcement came 30 minutes after James had retreated to file his report. The turbulence excuse was transparent. The sky outside was perfectly clear stars visible through the darkness, the flight path smooth as silk. But it served its purpose, keeping passengers seated while the crew determined their next steps. The seatbelt signs illuminated with a soft chime, creating a visual reinforcement of the captain's authority. In business class, Anthony discreetly unbuckled his seatbelt, preparing to move forward if necessary. The cabin lighting had been reduced to its nighttime setting, creating pools of shadow perfect for unobtrusive movement. The message on his phone was clear, Captain Fraser requesting verification of protocol. "Confirm CEO identity." Anthony replied, "Stand by. No confirmation yet." Her call. His finger hovered over the alert button that would initiate the contingency plan, a protocol they had hoped wouldn't be necessary. Alex continued her documentation, unruffled by the developing situation around her. The glow from her tablet illuminated her features, highlighting her composed determination. Jennifer passed through the cabin, ostensibly checking seatbelts, but clearly monitoring Alex while avoiding eye contact. Her movements were jerky, her usual fluid grace replaced by nervous energy. The tension in the first-class section had become palpable, with passengers exchanging glances and whispers. A businessman 3 rows back had his phone angled to record the scene discreetly. An older woman clutched her pearls, literally, as she watched the drama unfold with undisguised interest. Thomas Baker leaned across the aisle. The leather of his seat creaked as he shifted his weight. "They're trying to intimidate you into backing down," he said quietly. "I've seen this tactic before." "I'm aware," Alex replied. "But I'm not backing down." "Good," Thomas nodded. "I spent 30 years on the federal bench. This type of intimidation only works when people are scared. They're counting on your fear of authorities." Richard Foster studied her with increasing interest, his earlier condescension replaced by curiosity. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "most people would be panicking at the prospect of being detained in a foreign country." "I've faced worse," Alex replied simply. The statement hung between them, a reminder of the different realities they inhabited. "Who are you?" Richard asked directly, his analytical mind trying to solve the puzzle of her unwavering confidence. Before Alex could answer, James returned to the cabin, accompanied by a stern-looking man in plain clothes, presumably the air marshal he had threatened to involve. The man was in his 40s with the solid build and vigilant eyes of law enforcement. His casual clothing, khakis and a navy polo, was designed to blend in with business travelers. Ms. Morgan James announced with barely concealed satisfaction, "This is Federal Air Marshal Davis. He'd like to speak with you about your disruptive behavior." James stood slightly taller, clearly believing the presence of official authority would finally force Alex into compliance. The marshal looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight as his eyes scanned the scene. He had clearly been briefed by James rather than observing the situation firsthand. "Ma'am, I understand there's been an issue with compliance with crew instructions." Alex met his gaze calmly. "There's been an issue with discriminatory treatment by crew members, which I've been documenting as is my right as a passenger." The marshal glanced at James, then back to Alex. His expression suggested he was already sensing that the situation might not be as presented to him. "I've been informed you've refused direct instructions from the flight crew." "I've refused to stop documenting mistreatment," Alex clarified. "I've complied with all safety instructions and have not disturbed other passengers. The confrontations have been initiated by the crew." Thomas Baker spoke up again. "I can verify that. The lady has been perfectly calm while being increasingly mistreated by the flight attendants." His judicial tone carried natural authority. "I've witnessed the entire situation, Marshal, and would be willing to provide a formal statement if necessary." Gabriel added, "Several of us have witnessed the pattern of discriminatory service." He sat forward, his expression serious. "I fly this route monthly and have experienced similar treatment, though never this blatant." The marshal seemed taken aback by the passenger support. His gaze traveled around the cabin, noting multiple passengers nodding in agreement. The situation was clearly more complex than James had indicated. James quickly interjected, "These passengers don't have all the information. Ms. Morgan has been disruptive throughout the flight." His collar had begun to look damp, perspiration gathering despite the cabin's carefully controlled climate. In what specific ways, the marshal asked, his professional training evident in the precise question. James hesitated. Argumentative behavior, refusing direct instructions, creating anxiety among other passengers, unauthorized recording of flight operations. "I've been documenting discrimination," Alex corrected, "which is permitted under Horizon Airways' own passenger rights policy section 4.3, which specifically protects passengers' right to document their customer experience." The marshal raised an eyebrow at her specific knowledge of company policy. His posture shifted slightly, the subtle readjustment of someone recognizing that the situation before him wasn't as straightforward as described. "Ma'am, may I see your identification?" Alex reached for her bag, extracting her passport and a small leather wallet. She handed both to the marshal. "My identification and my Horizon Airways credentials." James frowned. "Credentials?" His eyes narrowed, confusion evident in his expression. The marshal opened the wallet, examining its contents carefully. His eyes widened slightly as he processed what he was seeing, then darted to Alex's face to confirm. His expression shifted subtly from professional concern to something approaching alarm. He looked at Alex with new understanding, then closed the wallet without revealing its contents to James. "I see," he said neutrally. "Ms. Morgan, there seems to be a misunderstanding. I don't believe any further action is necessary at this time." James stared in confusion, his professional demeanor cracking. "What? She's been directly violating Mr. Lawson." The marshal cut him off, his tone brooking no argument. "I suggest you return to your regular duties. There's no security concern here." Jennifer, watching from nearby, approached with growing agitation. Her steps were quick, almost frantic. "James? What's happening?" Her voice had risen half an octave, control slipping. The marshal turned to her. "Ma'am, please return to your station. This matter is resolved." "But she's been—" Jennifer began gesturing emphatically toward Alex. "This matter is resolved," the marshal repeated firmly, returning Alex's identification and credentials. "Thank you for your cooperation, Ms. Morgan." As the marshal departed, James stood, frozen, uncertainty creeping across his features. The confidence that had fueled his intimidation attempts was visibly crumbling as he tried to process what had just happened. Whatever he had seen in Alex's credentials had changed the situation completely. Richard Foster, who had been watching intently, reached for his phone and began typing rapidly. Alex noticed his screen. He was Googling Alexandria Morgan Horizon. Airways on his phone. His eyes widened as results appeared. Jennifer approached James, whispering urgently. Their conversation was just audible. What happened? Why did he back down? I don't know. He saw something in her ID. Who is she? I don't know yet, but something's not right. Jennifer's perfectly manicured nails dug into James's arm. Check the full passenger manifest, the detailed version with employment status. Their uncertain whispers were interrupted by the captain's voice over the intercom. Senior Flight Attendant Wilson and Chief Flight Attendant Lawson, please report to the cockpit immediately. The instruction, unusual mid-flight, sent a ripple of whispers through the cabin. Jennifer and James exchanged alarmed glances, their faces pale in the dim cabin lighting. Jennifer's hand went to her throat, a nervous gesture revealing her growing anxiety. This isn't standard procedure, Jennifer whispered just loud enough for those nearby to hear. James maintained his professional expression through visible effort. It's probably about the turbulence announcement. But his voice lacked conviction. As they made their way toward the front of the aircraft, the first-class cabin erupted in speculative whispers. Passengers leaned across aisles theories, spreading like wildfire. In their absence, Rachel approached Alex cautiously. Whatever is happening, thank you, she said quietly. They've been getting away with this for too long. How long has this been going on? Alex asked. Rachel glanced around to ensure no one could overhear. Her posture was that of someone unburdening a long-held secret. Years. There's an unofficial pattern. Certain passengers get inventory issues or service delays. It's never documented officially, but everyone knows who will be affected. And if you speak up, Alex prompted, you don't get assigned to premium routes. Rachel confirmed, her voice barely above a whisper. Or you get negative performance reviews. James and Jennifer control most of the international first-class assignments. They've ended careers over less than what I'm telling you now. She hesitated, then added, 3 months ago, a flight attendant named Marcus filed a formal complaint after seeing how they treated a black executive. 2 weeks later, he was transferred to domestic short hauls. The message was clear to all of us. Alex nodded, making additional notes. Thank you for your honesty, Rachel. I should have said something sooner. Rachel admitted guilt evident in her expression. But I was afraid. I have student loans, and this route's per diem makes the difference in making my payments each month. Change often starts with one person finding their courage, Alex replied. You're doing that now. In business class, Anthony received another message from Diana. Captain Fraser has been briefed, awaiting CEO's signal for full protocol implementation. Anthony responded, standing by. She hasn't signaled yet. His finger remained poised over the alert button that would set the contingency plan in motion. Richard Foster was staring at his phone, his expression transforming from confusion to shock as search results loaded. He looked at Alex with new eyes, then quickly closed his browser. His posture changed dramatically, straightening, adjusting his tie, smoothing his hair, the instinctive response of someone realizing they're in the presence of significant power. I think he said carefully, I may owe you an apology. Alex met his gaze calmly. Not just me. Richard nodded, understanding dawning. Yes, I see that now. His voice had lost the condescending edge, entirely replaced by the careful deference he typically reserved for those who could impact his business interests. The tension in the cabin had shifted. What had begun as crew members asserting authority over a passenger they deemed unworthy was evolving into something else entirely. The dawning recognition that they might have catastrophically misjudged the situation. In the cockpit, Captain Fraser was delivering news that would soon change everything. The pieces were aligning for the moment of revelation that would leave the crew speechless. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Fraser. Due to a technical issue, we'll be returning to our departure gate upon landing in Geneva rather than proceeding to the terminal. Please remain seated until further instructions." The announcement came as the plane began its descent, the Swiss landscape emerging through scattered clouds below the lights of Geneva twinkling like earthbound stars. The Jura Mountains created a dramatic backdrop against the pre-dawn sky, their silhouettes just becoming visible as night yielded to the first hint of morning. In first class, the atmosphere had transformed from open hostility to uncertain tension. James and Jennifer had returned from the cockpit visibly shaken, their demeanor completely altered. Jennifer moved through the cabin like a ghost of her former self, her usual confident stride replaced by tentative steps, her eyes darting nervously between passengers. She approached Alex with an entirely new demeanor, shoulders slightly hunched, smile strained to the breaking point. Water Jennifer offered Alex her previously dismissive tone replaced with nervous solicitude. The crystal glass trembled slightly in her hand, or perhaps coffee tea. "We have a selection of premium blends." The sudden attentiveness might have been comical if the preceding hours hadn't been so tense. "No, thank you," Alex replied calmly, continuing her documentation. Jennifer hesitated, clearly wanting to say more but uncertain how to proceed. Her makeup, perfect hours ago, had begun to show signs of stress, a smudge of mascara beneath her right eye foundation beginning to crease around her mouth. "If there's anything at all," she began. "That will be all," Alex interrupted quietly. The simple dismissal, using the same technique Jennifer had employed repeatedly throughout the flight, landed with precision. Jennifer nodded too quickly and retreated, nearly colliding with a meal cart in her haste. James hovered nearby, attempting casual conversation with other passengers while stealing glances at Alex. His previous confidence had evaporated, replaced by barely concealed anxiety. His hand went repeatedly to his collar, adjusting it despite its perfect alignment. Richard Foster leaned closer to Alex, close enough that his expensive cologne, sandalwood and bergamot, briefly enveloped them both. "You're Alexandria Morgan," he said quietly, "CEO of Horizon Airways." Alex met his gaze steadily but didn't confirm or deny. Her expression remained neutral, though a hint of something, perhaps satisfaction, flickered briefly in her eyes. "I Googled you," Richard continued. "Though there weren't many photos in the search results, you keep a low public profile." He glanced at his phone again, where an official corporate portrait showed Alexandria Morgan in executive attire, a stark contrast to her current deliberately understated appearance. "I prefer to let my work speak for itself," Alex replied. Richard nodded, processing this revelation. "The invisible CEO. That's what this is, isn't it? You're evaluating your own airline's service." His analytical mind was rapidly reassessing every interaction he'd witnessed over the past hours. Again, Alex didn't directly confirm, but her slight smile told him everything. "Brilliant," Richard murmured. "Terrifying, but brilliant." His expression showed newfound respect, tinged with the uncomfortable awareness of his own complicity in the cabin dynamics. From 3A, Gabriel watched the interaction with interest. "Something's changed," he observed. "They look scared." "People often fear accountability," Alex replied. The plane continued its descent, the gentle pressure change causing ears to pop throughout the cabin. The tension built with each passing minute, every small sound amplified by the collective anticipation. Jennifer's hands trembled visibly as she collected trash, the crystal and china clinking nervously in her unsteady grip. James maintained his professional demeanor through visible effort, though a sheen of perspiration had formed on his forehead, despite the cabin's cool temperature. Rachel moved through the cabin with new confidence, her previous fear of the senior staff apparently evaporated. She caught Alex's eye and gave a small, knowing smile, the shared acknowledgement of a shifting power dynamic. As the wheels touched down on the Geneva runway, Anthony sent his final message to Diana Landing now. Protocol Implementation. The response came immediately, full implementation authorized. Chairman Blackwell and executive team standing by at private terminal. The aircraft taxied not to the terminal but back toward the departure gate as the captain had announced. Through the windows, passengers could see an unusual sight, a group of people in suits waiting on the jet bridge accompanied by airport officials. The distinctive Horizon Airways executive livery car was visible on the tarmac below, a vehicle typically reserved for the highest-ranking company officers. "Ladies and gentlemen," Captain Fraser's voice came over the intercom. "We've arrived at our remote gate. Please remain seated with seatbelts fastened until further notice." Jennifer approached Alex one last time, her professional mask now transparent with fear. Perspiration had created small streaks in her foundation, and her smile looked like it might shatter at the slightest pressure. "Ms. Morgan, I want to apologize for any misunderstanding earlier. We strive to provide excellent service to all our passengers." The words emerged too quickly rehearsed, but delivered with panicked urgency. "Do you?" Alex asked simply, her calm demeanor contrasting sharply with Jennifer's growing distress. Jennifer faltered the practiced line dying on her lips. "Of course. Horizon Airways values every customer equally." Her voice had risen half an octave, cracking slightly on the final word. "Interesting," Alex replied. "That hasn't been my experience today." Before Jennifer could respond, the cabin door opened. Instead of the typical ground crew, a woman in an executive suit entered, followed by a man in a pilot's uniform with captain's stripes. Not Captain Fraser, but someone more senior. The woman, Diana Rodriguez, carried herself with the confidence of significant authority. The man beside her, wearing the 4 stripes of the chief pilot, surveyed the cabin with a practiced evaluative eye. Anthony Alex acknowledged as her VP of Operations approached from the rear of the aircraft, having moved from business class during the landing process. "Alex," he replied, then handed her a tablet. "Everything transmitted perfectly. Diana has the complete record." James and Jennifer froze, their expressions transforming as the truth dawned in horrifying clarity. Jennifer's hand flew to her mouth, stifling an audible gasp. James stood rigid, his face draining of color so rapidly it was visible even in the subdued cabin lighting. Alexandria Anthony continued deliberately, using her full name loud enough for the entire cabin to hear. "Chairman Blackwell is waiting in the terminal with the executive team. The quarterly reports you requested have been prepared for review." The cabin fell completely silent. Richard Foster swallowed hard, the sound audible in the sudden stillness. Gabriel leaned forward in his seat, a smile spreading across his face as he realized what was happening. Thomas Baker let out a low whistle of appreciation. "Well played," he murmured. Jennifer's face had gone from pale to ashen. "Alexandria Morgan," she whispered the name, emerging as barely more than a breath. Horizon Airways CEO. James stood rigid with shock, his career flashing before his eyes. A muscle jumped in his jaw, the only movement in his otherwise frozen posture. Alex stood calmly, straightening her simple cardigan. Her transformation was remarkable. Without changing her clothing or appearance, she seemed to grow taller, her presence expanding to fill the cabin. What had been deliberately muted authority now radiated naturally, the CEO no longer invisible. "Now that I have your attention," she said, her voice carrying through the silent cabin, "let's discuss the real purpose of today's flight." She turned to address the entire first-class section. "What you've witnessed today wasn't a misunderstanding or an isolated incident. It was a test. The Invisible CEO program I implemented to evaluate how our airline treats passengers when staff don't recognize them as important." Jennifer took an unsteady step backward, nearly tripping over her sensible heels. "Miss Morgan, I had no idea. That was precisely the point." Alex interrupted, her tone remaining calm but carrying unmistakable authority. "You shouldn't need to know who I am to treat me with basic dignity and respect." Anthony handed her another tablet displaying a corporate organizational chart. Full staff records as requested, including service complaint patterns by passenger demographics. Alex glanced at the data, nodding slightly. As I suspected. Thomas Baker spoke from his seat. I've been flying Horizon for 20 years. I've never experienced what you endured today. But I've seen it happen to others, and I'm ashamed to say I rarely spoke up. Gabriel added, It happens every month. The sandwich trick, the ignored call buttons, we're out of that excuse. Most of us just accept it as the cost of flying while Black or Hispanic. Alex nodded. That ends today. She turned back to James and Jennifer, who remained frozen in place. Her voice remained measured but carried unmistakable authority. You'll both be escorted to a meeting with HR representatives waiting at the gate. You're suspended pending a full investigation. Your airline credentials have been temporarily deactivated. You can't? James began finding his voice at last. I can. Alex corrected him. And I have. The evidence has been documented and transmitted in real time to our headquarters. Every service disparity, every discriminatory comment, every retaliatory action. James's professional demeanor crumbled entirely, replaced by defensive anger. This is entrapment. You deliberately misled us about your identity. No, Alex replied. I simply observed how you treat passengers you don't recognize as important. My name was on the manifest. My CEO status was in the system. You chose not to check because you made assumptions based on appearance. Rachel stepped forward. It's not just today, she said, finding her voice. It's a pattern that's been happening for years. Certain passengers are marked for special handling. It's an unofficial policy. James shot her a warning glare, but Rachel stood firm. Her previous fear had been replaced by the courage of someone who had nothing left to lose. There are dozens of flight attendants who can verify this, she continued. Most are too afraid to speak up because James controls the premium route assignments. Alex nodded. Thank you for your honesty, Rachel. You'll be part of the solution going forward. She turned back to the rest of the passengers. I apologize that you had to witness this today. Every passenger deserves the same level of respect and service regardless of appearance, background, or status. Horizon Airways has failed to live up to that standard, but that changes now. Richard Foster cleared his throat. For what it's worth, I saw it happening and said nothing. I'm part of the problem too. Acknowledgement is the first step toward change, Alex replied. Anthony gestured toward the door. The executive team is waiting in the VIP lounge. Transportation has been arranged. Alex nodded, then paused to address the cabin one final time. What happened today isn't unique to this airline or this flight. It happens every day in countless settings. The difference is that today it happened to someone in a position to demand accountability. She looked directly at James and Jennifer. That sandwich you served me, it's going to transform this airline. Jennifer's eyes filled with tears, not of remorse, but of the sudden devastating recognition of consequences. James remained rigid, his jaw clenched so tightly a muscle visibly jumped beneath the skin. With those words, Alex walked toward the door, leaving behind a cabin full of stunned passengers and crew members whose world had just been turned upside down. The sun had fully risen now, streaming through the windows and illuminating the cabin in the clear light of a new day. The dramatic revelation, the moment when a marginalized passenger was suddenly revealed as the most powerful person on the aircraft, had left the crew speechless, just as the title promised. But the real impact was only beginning. I trusted you with my airline's most valuable asset, our passengers' dignity. You betrayed that trust. Alex's words cut through the tense silence of the VIP lounge at Geneva International Airport. The room, typically a sanctuary of luxury for the airline's most valued passengers, had been transformed into an impromptu tribunal. Its plush leather seating, ambient lighting, and subtle artwork created a jarring contrast to the grave proceedings unfolding within. Before her stood James Lawson and Jennifer Wilson, their professional composure crumbled into barely concealed panic. James stood with his hands clasped behind his back in a military-like stance, a physical manifestation of his attempt to maintain control. Jennifer's perfectly manicured fingers twisted a tissue to shreds, her eyes darting between executives as if searching for a sympathetic face and finding none. Around the room, Horizon Airways' executive team watched solemnly, including Chairman Evan Blackwell, whose normally confident expression had given way to grave concern. At 72, Blackwell had seen decades of airline industry changes, but the evidence presented on the monitors around the room had visibly shaken him. His silver hair caught the light as he leaned forward, elbows on knees, watching the confrontation with intense focus. Ms. Morgan Jennifer began, her voice higher than normal. CEO Morgan Anthony corrected firmly, standing slightly behind Alex like a sentinel. Jennifer swallowed hard, her throat moving visibly with the effort. CEO Morgan, there's been a terrible misunderstanding. Had we known who you were? That is precisely the problem. Alex interrupted, her voice level but intense. You shouldn't need to know who someone is to treat them with basic human dignity. James attempted a different approach, adjusting his posture to appear reasonable and conciliatory. We maintain the highest standards of service. Today was an unfortunate anomaly. Stop, Alex said, holding up her tablet. We have the entire flight documented. Every service disparity, every microaggression, every retaliatory action when I began documenting the treatment. This wasn't an anomaly. It was a revelation of existing patterns. On the screen, security footage from the aircraft showed the sandwich incident from multiple angles alongside timestamps documenting the 17 minutes her call button had been ignored while others received immediate attention. The evidence was damning in its objectivity. No interpretation needed, just the stark reality of disparate treatment captured in high definition. The evidence is unambiguous, Diana Rodriguez stated, stepping forward with her own tablet. At 42, the head of customer experience carried herself with the confidence of someone whose data was beyond question. We've already reviewed past customer complaints and identified a troubling pattern. Complaints from passengers of color about service disparities were consistently downgraded or dismissed as misunderstandings under your supervision, Mr. Lawson. She tapped her tablet, and the wall screen displayed a chart showing complaint resolution patterns broken down by passenger demographics. The disparities were stark and unmistakable, a visual representation of institutional bias that no one in the room could deny. James paled, visibly, beads of sweat forming on his forehead, despite the room's perfect climate control. It's documented. Diana cut him off, displaying a second chart showing how complaint classifications had been systematically altered. Over the past 3 years, 86% of service complaints from passengers of color were reclassified as passenger misunderstanding or special circumstances, compared to 14% for white passengers. James's hand moved unconsciously to loosen his tie, the gesture of a man who felt the noose of evidence tightening. His eyes darted to Jennifer, a silent plea for support or perhaps sharing of blame. Jennifer attempted one last defense, her voice taking on the wounded tone of someone unfairly accused. We're trained to handle difficult passengers. I wasn't difficult, Alex stated firmly. I was black in first class. That was enough for you to decide I didn't deserve equal service. Jennifer flinched as if struck, her carefully constructed professional persona cracking further. I have friends who are... Her voice trailed off as she realized the futility of what she was about to say. From the doorway, Rachel Thompson stepped in, hesitantly, having been summoned to the meeting. She looked small in the presence of so many executives, but her spine was straight, her resolve evident. It's a common practice, she confirmed quietly. Certain passengers are subtly marked for inventory issues or service delays. It's never documented explicitly, but every crew member knows what it means. And if you object? Alex prompted. Rachel looked down her fingers, fidgeting with the cuff of her uniform. You don't get assigned to premium international routes. Your performance reviews suffer. It's an unwritten rule. She glanced up briefly, meeting James's eyes before continuing. Last year, David Chen questioned why a black passenger in 3C wasn't offered the same wine selection as others. The next month, he was assigned to short domestic routes exclusively. His per diem dropped by 60%. James shot her a venomous glare, but remained silent, finally recognizing the gravity of his situation. His career of over 2 decades was balanced on a knife's edge, and he knew it. Chairman Blackwell cleared his throat. Alexandria. What are you proposing we do? His voice carried the weight of institutional authority, but also genuine concern. The data displayed around the room couldn't be denied even by someone who had spent decades in an industry that often resisted change. Alex turned to face the executive team. Her posture was relaxed but authoritative, the stance of someone completely comfortable with her power. This isn't a matter for debate or deliberation. James Lawson and Jennifer Wilson are terminated effective immediately. The declaration hung in the air, uncompromising. Jennifer let out a small involuntary sound, part gasp, part sob. James remained rigidly still, only the muscle twitching in his jaw betraying his reaction. Additionally, Alex continued, "We're implementing the dignity protocol across the entire airline starting today." "The what?" Blackwell asked, leaning forward with interest. Alex nodded to Diana, who distributed tablets to each executive with a detailed presentation already loaded. The Dignity Protocol is a comprehensive reform of our service standards, training procedures, and accountability measures. She swiped through slides on her own tablet, displaying key elements. Anonymous testing across all routes and service classes. Mandatory bias recognition training with real consequences for violations. Demographic tracking of service quality metrics. An independent review board for customer complaints. Blackwell frowned, his business mind immediately calculating costs. This will be expensive and disruptive to implement. More expensive than the lawsuit that would result if today's footage leaked Alex challenged. More disruptive than the public relations crisis we'd face. The chairman fell silent, recognizing the truth in her words. His fingers drummed briefly on the armrest of his chair, a nervous habit he'd developed over decades of tense negotiations. Alex continued, "This isn't just about legal exposure or public relations. It's about who we are as a company. We can't claim to connect the world if we're reinforcing its divisions." Outside the lounge, passengers from Flight 218 were being escorted to a separate area, many still processing what they had witnessed. Gabriel Martinez stood with Thomas Baker comparing notes on their experiences. Their animated conversation carried the energy of people who had witnessed something historic. Richard Foster sat alone, uncharacteristically subdued, staring at his phone where news headlines about Horizon Airways were already beginning to appear. Not about discrimination, but about the innovative Invisible CEO program being lauded as a revolutionary approach to quality control. Back in the VIP lounge, Jennifer finally found her voice again. "Please, you can't just end our careers over one bad day." Her carefully applied makeup had begun to streak with tears. The controlled professional image completely shattered. It wasn't one day Rachel interjected, finding unexpected courage. Her voice grew stronger with each word. It was hundreds of days affecting thousands of passengers who didn't have the power to fight back. She turned to Jennifer directly. "You told me on my first international flight. Some passengers need to be managed differently. You showed me how to code complaints so they wouldn't escalate. You taught me to profile passengers based on appearance." The words tumbled out, years of suppressed truth finally finding release. James remained silent, the full weight of consequences finally settling upon him. His eyes had taken on the 1,000-yard stare of someone seeing their entire future collapse. Alex turned back to the executives. "This moment will define Horizon Airways, not by the discrimination that occurred, but by how decisively we address it." She faced James and Jennifer one last time. You had the privilege of representing this company to the world. You abused that privilege by creating a two-tiered system where some passengers were deemed worthy of respect and others were not. That ends today. Security personnel appeared at the door waiting to escort the terminated employees. Their presence, professional but unmistakable, underlined the finality of the decision. You'll be provided with the standard separation package, Alex informed them. But there will be no recommendations, no references, and a permanent note in your aviation employment records regarding the reason for termination. Jennifer began to openly cry now the facade completely crumbled. James remained stoic, but the defeat in his eyes was total. As they were led away, Jennifer in tears and James in stony silence, Alex turned to Rachel. You showed courage today. That's the quality we need moving forward. Rachel nodded, still processing the whirlwind of events. What happens now? Alex smiled slightly. Now we rebuild, and you're going to help us do it. Diana stepped forward with another tablet. We've already identified 27 flight attendants who filed internal concerns about discriminatory practices and subsequently had their careers sidelined. Rachel will help us contact them as part of our reformation team. Rachel's eyes widened. You want me to lead this? Who better? Alex replied. You've seen the problem from the inside. You understand both the formal and informal systems that enabled it. And most importantly, you found your voice when it mattered most. Chairman Blackwell, recognizing the inevitable, finally nodded his agreement. I'll call an emergency board meeting to formally approve the Dignity Protocol implementation. It's already approved, Alex informed him calmly. I invoked my emergency executive authority the moment the pattern of discrimination was confirmed. The implementation begins now. As the executive team absorbed this declaration, Alex checked her watch. We have a press conference in 30 minutes. Diana has prepared statements for everyone. We're getting ahead of this story, not hiding what happened, but showcasing how we're fixing it. Outside the lounge, Gabriel approached Anthony with a question. Will this really change anything, or is it just damage control? Anthony smiled, the expression showing genuine pride rather than corporate confidence. You don't know Alexandria Morgan very well. This isn't damage control. It's the mission she's been building toward for years. When she purchased Horizon Airways, she told the board her goal wasn't just profitability, but transformation. That sandwich didn't just reveal discrimination, it launched a revolution. Inside, Alex stood at the window watching Horizon Airways planes taking off and landing, each one carrying hundreds of passengers who deserved equal dignity, regardless of appearance or background. The morning sun illuminated her determined expression as she prepared for the next phase. The real work was just beginning, but the message had been delivered in unmistakable terms. No one would be invisible again. Horizon Airways announces groundbreaking dignity protocol following CEO's undercover flight. The headlines splashed across news sites worldwide as Alexandria Morgan stepped up to the podium, flanked by Chairman Blackwell and the executive team. The press conference room at Geneva International Airport buzzed with energy as journalists from major outlets crowded together, sensing a significant story unfolding. Camera flashes illuminated Alex's composed expression as she addressed the crowd. Behind her, a digital screen displayed the Horizon Airways logo above the words, Dignity for All, the new tagline that would soon appear across the airline's global marketing. The lighting cast dramatic shadows across her face, highlighting her determined expression. Today, Horizon Airways is taking unprecedented action to address service disparities that have no place in our company or our industry. Alex began, her voice steady and authoritative. What began as a routine evaluation revealed patterns that demanded immediate correction. The room fell silent, journalists leaning forward in their seats, recognizing that this wasn't standard corporate damage control, but something more substantial. The usual background whispers and typing ceased as Alex continued. In the front row, Gabriel Martinez and Thomas Baker sat as honored guests, their experiences now part of a transformative corporate narrative. Rachel Thompson stood to the side with a group of flight attendants representing the workforce that would implement the changes. Her previously nervous demeanor had been replaced by quiet confidence, the posture of someone who had found her purpose. The dignity protocol isn't just a policy change, Alex continued. It's a fundamental reorientation of how we view our responsibility to passengers. Every person who steps onto our aircraft deserves identical respect and service, regardless of appearance, background, or status. A journalist from the Financial Times raised her hand. CEO Morgan, can you elaborate on what happened during your undercover flight? She held her recorder closer, sensing the story that would dominate tomorrow's business section. Alex nodded. I experienced firsthand what some of our passengers have reported for years, subtle but unmistakable differences in service based on perceived status and race. When I requested the same amenities freely offered to other first-class passengers, I was denied, deflected, and ultimately threatened with detention. The press room erupted in murmurs. Cameras clicked rapidly, capturing her expression as she detailed the sandwich incident, the ignored call button, the escalating retaliation when she began documenting the disparities. She spoke without notes, the details indelibly etched in her memory. The most revealing aspect wasn't the initial discrimination, she explained. It was how quickly it escalated to threats when questioned. That speaks to an entrenched culture that needed immediate intervention. Another reporter followed up. What concrete changes does the dignity protocol include? The woman's pen hovered over her notebook, ready to capture specifics rather than corporate platitudes. Alex gestured to Diana Rodriguez, who stepped forward with detailed materials for distribution. The packets, bound in Horizon Airways blue, contained comprehensive breakdowns of the new protocols, including implementation timelines and accountability metrics. The protocol has 5 core components. Diana explained, her expertise evident in her precise delivery. First, anonymous testing across all routes and service classes conducted by evaluators of diverse backgrounds. Second, comprehensive bias recognition training with regular recertification requirements. Third, demographic tracking of service quality metrics to identify patterns. Fourth, an independent review board for customer complaints, bypassing the previous system where complaints were often dismissed without investigation. And fifth, a passenger bill of rights that will be displayed on every aircraft. Chairman Blackwell, initially hesitant about the sweeping changes, now spoke with apparent conviction. His decades in the industry had taught him when to recognize a turning point. What Alexandria has identified isn't unique to Horizon Airways. It's an industry-wide challenge that no airline has properly addressed until now. We're setting a new standard that we believe others will soon follow. His support wasn't merely for show. The data had convinced him that both morality and business interests aligned in this case. His gray suit and conservative tie projected stability even as he endorsed radical change. Alex resumed the microphone. 2 senior crew members have been terminated as a result of their actions. But this isn't about individual punishment. It's about structural reform. The problem wasn't just a few bad actors. It was a system that enabled and protected discriminatory behavior. In the executive offices above the press conference, a board meeting was simultaneously unfolding. Several directors watched the live stream with expressions ranging from concern to outright alarm. The wood-paneled room with its views of the Geneva airfield felt suddenly claustrophobic as they processed the implications. "She's going too far," Marcus Wilson, the most conservative director, muttered. "This will cost millions to implement." His finger jabbed at the budget projections displayed on his tablet. "And how many millions in lawsuits and lost business if we don't countered Sophia Chen, head of the Risk Management Committee? She's getting ahead of a crisis that could have destroyed the company." Her decades of legal experience allowed her to envision the litigation nightmare they had narrowly avoided. "The data doesn't lie," added Financial Director Robert Patel, pointing to the complaint statistics. "We've been sitting on a time bomb." Morgan diffused it and turned it into an opportunity. Back at the podium, Alex introduced Rachel Thompson. "The true heroes in this situation are employees like Rachel who risked their careers to speak truth to power. She'll be leading our internal reformation team comprised of staff who previously raised concerns about these practices but were sidelined for their honesty." Rachel approached the microphone nervously but spoke with growing confidence. "What happened on that flight happens every day across the industry. The difference is that most passengers don't have the power to demand change. Today we're listening to all those voices that have been ignored." A journalist pressed further. "Will there be compensation for passengers who experienced discrimination in the past?" Alex nodded. "Yes. We're establishing a customer reconciliation program to address past complaints that were dismissed. But more importantly, we're creating systems to ensure these experiences don't continue." The questions continued for nearly an hour, with Alex and her team providing detailed, transparent answers about both the problems identified and the solutions being implemented. Throughout, Alex maintained her composed authority, neither defensive nor apologetic, but resolutely focused on transformation. As the press conference concluded, Gabriel approached Alex. "Will this really stick?" he asked quietly, his expression hopeful but cautious. "Once the media attention fades." Alex met his gaze steadily. "It will stick because we're changing the infrastructure, not just the messaging, and because people like you will hold us accountable." She handed him a business card with her direct contact information. "I want to hear about your next flight with us. Good or bad. No filters, no PR team, direct feedback." Thomas Baker joined them, extending his hand. "In 30 years of corporate leadership, I've never seen anything like what you did today. Most companies would have buried this and bought silence. Silence is what allowed these patterns to develop," Alex replied. "Transparency is the only cure." Meanwhile, in a small office off the main terminal, Anthony Rivera was conducting interviews with passengers from Flight 218, documenting their observations for the official record. The testimonies would form part of both the internal investigation and the training materials for the new protocol. Richard Foster sat uncomfortably in the small interview room, having requested to speak last. The leather chair creaked as he shifted his weight, his usual confident demeanor replaced by genuine reflection. "I was complicit," he admitted finally. "I saw how differently she was treated and said nothing. Worse, I benefited from it." Anthony nodded, recording his statement. "Recognition is the first step," he said. "But what matters is what you do next time you witness something similar." "I've spent 20 years in first-class cabins," Richard replied. "Never once intervened when I saw others receiving inferior treatment. I told myself it wasn't my business." "And now," Anthony prompted, "now I understand that privilege isn't just about what you receive. It's about what you don't have to see." Richard's expression reflected genuine discomfort with his realization. "I can't unsee it anymore." Across the airport in the employee break room, the news was spreading rapidly among Horizon Airways staff. The television mounted on the wall played the press conference with clusters of employees watching intently. Some reacted with defensive anger, others with reluctant acknowledgement, but many with relief that long-standing issues were finally being addressed. A veteran flight attendant watched the live stream on her phone, turning to her colleagues with tears in her eyes. "I've been writing up these incidents for 7 years and getting nowhere." Finally, someone listened. Another crew member shook his head. "James and Jennifer deserved what they got. They've been pulling that sandwich trick for years." A younger flight attendant looked concerned. "What does this mean for us? Are we all going to be tested now?" "Yes," replied her supervisor. "And that's a good thing. We should be able to pass any service equality test without even thinking about it." In the executive suite, Alex reviewed the implementation timeline with Diana and the department heads. The room hummed with energy. Not the frantic damage control often seen in corporate crises, but the focused determination of meaningful change. I want the training program operational within 30 days, anonymous testing beginning in 60 days, and full protocol implementation within 90 days. No exceptions, no delays. The industry standard would be 6 to 12 months for changes of this magnitude, one executive protested, shuffling through the timeline documents with concern. "We're not following industry standards," Alex replied firmly. "That's how we ended up here. We're setting new ones." The team dispersed with clear assignments and ambitious deadlines. The machinery of corporate change, usually ponderous and resistant, had been jolted into high-speed motion by the undeniable evidence and Alex's unwavering leadership. As darkness fell over Geneva, the ripple effects of the day's events continued to spread. In industry chat rooms and flight crew forums, heated debates erupted about what the changes would mean. In newsrooms, analysts speculated about whether other airlines would follow suit or resist the pressure to reform. Social media buzzed with discussions of the invisible CEO approach, with business schools already requesting case studies. The hashtag Dignity Protocol trended globally, with thousands sharing their own experiences of discrimination in premium service environments. But in her hotel suite, reviewing the day's events and preparing for tomorrow's challenges, Alex remained focused on the core mission, ensuring that no passenger would ever again be served a sandwich simply because they didn't look like they belonged in first class. The Horizon Airways revolution had begun with a single act of discrimination. It would end with a fundamental reimagining of what equality in the skies truly meant. Day 1 of Dignity Protocol Implementation. Are we ready? Alexandria. Morgan stood before the assembled team in Horizon Airways' main training center 90 days after the Geneva incident. The large auditorium had been transformed into command central for the most ambitious corporate culture change in the company's history. Wall-to-wall screens displayed real-time data feeds from flights around the world, creating a digital nervous system for monitoring service quality. The room was filled with the newly formed Dignity Standards team, 27 employees who had previously raised concerns about discriminatory practices and now found themselves at the forefront of corporate transformation. Their faces showed a mixture of determination and disbelief. Many had been relegated to undesirable routes after speaking up, only to find themselves suddenly at the center of the company's most important initiative. "As ready as we can be," Diana Rodriguez replied, distributing the final implementation checklists. Her tablet projected onto the main screen a global map showing every active Horizon Airways flight, color-coded by implementation status. All flight crews have completed the initial training. Anonymous evaluators are positioned across our route network. The passenger rights documentation has been installed on every aircraft. The independent review board is operational. Alex nodded, studying the massive project management board that detailed each aspect of the protocol. What had begun as a response to a single incident had evolved into the most comprehensive service standard reform in aviation history. First feedback reports, she asked, scanning the data streams. Rachel Thompson, now promoted to Director of Service Standards, stepped forward. 3 months ago, she had been a junior flight attendant, afraid to speak up. Today, she led a team of 50 specialists responsible for ensuring consistent service across the entire airline. The transformation in her bearing was remarkable. Confidence replacing fear, purpose replacing uncertainty. Mixed as expected, Rachel reported, bringing up the initial data. Most crews have embraced the changes, especially younger staff and those who witnessed discrimination but felt powerless to address it. There's resistance from some senior staff who see this as an attack on their autonomy. The screen behind her displayed anonymous feedback from crew members, ranging from enthusiastic support to thinly veiled resentment. One comment stood out. "Now we have to treat everyone like they matter. Do you know how much extra work that is?" That attitude is precisely why we needed this change, Alex noted, highlighting the comment for the team. Those who see equal treatment as a burden rather than a baseline standard will identify themselves through their resistance. And passenger response, she continued. Overwhelmingly positive, Anthony confirmed, bringing up his own data set. Satisfaction ratings are up 17% overall, with a 34% increase among passengers of color. Social media sentiment has shifted from predominantly negative to 78% positive. He displayed a word cloud showing terms passengers were using to describe their experiences. Respectful, attentive, consistent, and dignified featured prominently. Alex walked to the window overlooking the tarmac, where Horizon Airways planes now bore a small but significant addition, a dignity pledge inscribed beside the boarding door, visible to every passenger entering the aircraft. The simple words, "Every passenger deserves equal respect and service," represented a public commitment that couldn't easily be abandoned. "What about the industry response?" she asked, turning back to the team. Chairman Blackwell, initially skeptical but now fully committed to the reforms, answered from the doorway. The past 3 months had transformed his thinking as he witnessed both the moral necessity and business benefits of the changes. That's the most surprising development. 3 major competitors have requested consultations on implementing similar programs. The International Air Transport Association has invited you to keynote their annual conference, and the Department of Transportation is considering adopting elements of our passenger rights documentation as regulatory standards. He approached the central table, placing a stack of industry publications on its surface. Every aviation magazine has featured the Dignity Protocol in the past month. We're being cited as industry leaders in both service quality and corporate ethics. Alex nodded, taking in the broader impact of what had begun with a sandwich in first class. And our internal metrics, Diana pulled up detailed analytics on the main screen. The data told a story of transformation in vivid, color-coded charts. Complaint patterns have already begun to equalize across demographics. Service consistency scores are trending upward across all routes. Employee satisfaction has increased by 22%. Many staff report feeling empowered to provide better service without fear of reprisal from supervisors protecting unofficial policies. The meeting continued with detailed updates on each protocol component. Training modules were being refined based on initial feedback. Anonymous evaluators were documenting both problems and best practices across the network. The independent review board had already processed over 300 previously dismissed complaints, providing both resolution to affected passengers and valuable data for system improvement. As the team dispersed to their respective responsibilities, Alex remained behind with Rachel, reviewing the crew feedback more thoroughly. "There's a pattern here," Rachel noted, highlighting several comments. The most resistant staff all worked under James and Jennifer. They were rewarded for maintaining the same service disparities that got their supervisors fired. She pulled up personnel records showing how certain flight attendants had received prime assignments and bonuses despite customer complaints. The pattern was clear. Those who perpetuated the discriminatory system had been systematically rewarded, while those who challenged it were marginalized. "Cultural change takes time," Alex acknowledged. "Not everyone will adapt." "And those who don't?" Rachel asked the question, reflecting her own journey from silent witness to change agent. "They'll find their opportunities limited until they choose to leave," Alex replied matter-of-factly. "We won't terminate people for resistance to change, but we won't promote them either. Excellence requires commitment to equal dignity for all passengers." She highlighted another comment from a senior flight attendant. "I've been serving first class for 20 years. I know what these passengers want better than some corporate initiative." "That's the heart of the problem," Alex observed. "The assumption that these passengers are a monolith with identical preferences based on appearance. True service excellence means treating each individual with equal respect while recognizing their unique needs." Across the operations center, Anthony was conducting a meeting with the pilot leadership team. The spacious cockpit simulation room had been repurposed for this gathering, with 30 captains and first officers seated in rows facing the presentation screen. Captain Fraser, who had cooperated fully in the Geneva investigation, now led the pilot implementation of the Dignity Protocol. His silver hair caught the light as he addressed his colleagues with conviction born of personal transformation. "Cabin culture starts with us," he emphasized. "When pilots ignore or enable discriminatory practices, we're complicit. Our new standard operating procedures include direct reporting channels for observed disparities." He detailed how captains would now receive real-time alerts about service inconsistencies, with the authority to intervene immediately rather than deferring to cabin crew hierarchies. "We're the final authority on our aircraft. That includes ensuring every passenger receives equal treatment." 6 pilots had resigned rather than adapt to the new standards. Their departure had created ripples through the company but also opened spaces for advancement for those who embraced the new direction. Dozens more had initially resisted but gradually embraced the changes as they witnessed improvements in overall operations. The transformation wasn't just affecting passenger experiences, it was reshaping the company culture from within. In the customer service center, a wall displayed the before and after statistics that had become a source of both shame and pride. Complaint resolution rates by passenger demographics before the protocol showed dramatic disparities. Current data showed increasingly consistent outcomes, regardless of background. "We still have work to do," noted Samantha Lee, the newly appointed Director of Customer Resolution. "But we're seeing measurable improvement every week." Gabriel Martinez, invited to join the Passenger Advisory Board, arrived for his monthly meeting with Diana. Dressed in a charcoal suit that spoke of his executive position, he carried a leather portfolio containing detailed notes from his recent flights. "I just completed my 3rd flight since Geneva," he reported. "The difference is remarkable. Not just for me, but watching how all passengers are treated." "Any remaining issues?" Diana asked, taking detailed notes on her tablet. "Subtle things," Gabriel replied. "Some crews still seem more comfortable engaging with certain passengers. But when it comes to actual service delivery, the standards are being applied consistently." He detailed an interaction he'd witnessed on his flight from Paris. A flight attendant had initially gravitated toward white passengers during pre-flight service, but had caught herself and deliberately readjusted to ensure equal attention to all first-class customers. "What I found most encouraging was watching her self-correct," Gabriel explained. "The awareness is developing. That's harder to teach than procedures." In the executive boardroom, Alex presented the quarterly results to a now supportive board of directors. The polished mahogany table reflected the screen as she walked through the metrics showing how each aspect of the Dignity Protocol had translated into business outcomes. What had initially been viewed as a potentially costly overcorrection had proven to be a business advantage. Passenger loyalty had increased, particularly among previously underserved demographics. Employee retention had improved, and the positive publicity had attracted new business partners and corporate accounts. "The Dignity Protocol isn't just ethically right," Alex concluded. "It's financially sound. Equal treatment isn't a cost center, it's a profit driver." She displayed the final slide showing year-over-year comparison revenue up 12%, costs down 8%, and customer loyalty metrics showing dramatic improvement. The combination of ethical imperative and business success had silenced even the most skeptical directors. Even Richard Foster, who had experienced a profound shift in perspective since witnessing the Geneva incident, had become an unexpected advocate. As a frequent first-class traveler with extensive business connections, his vocal support for the changes had influenced other corporate travelers who might otherwise have resisted disruption to their privileged status. "I've been recommending Horizon to all my colleagues," he reported during his advisory board meeting. "Not despite the changes, but because of them. The consistency of service has made every flight better for everyone." The most significant validation came 6 months after implementation, when an industry publication conducted an independent assessment of service consistency across major airlines. Horizon Airways ranked first by a substantial margin, with evaluators specifically citing the Dignity Protocol as a revolutionary approach to ensuring all passengers receive the service they've purchased, regardless of appearance or background. The article included blind testing results showing that Horizon was the only major airline where service quality showed no statistically significant variation based on passenger demographics. The data vindicated Alex's approach and created pressure on competitors to follow suit. What had begun as a personal humiliation had evolved into an industry-leading standard. The transformation wasn't perfect. Pockets of resistance remained, old habits occasionally resurfaced, and continuous vigilance was required. But the trajectory was clear and irreversible. In her office overlooking the operations center, Alex reviewed the latest anonymous evaluator reports with satisfaction. The sandwich incident that had sparked the revolution now seemed both distant and immediate, a pivotal moment that had revealed both the worst and the best possibilities within the company she led. A message appeared on her screen from Rachel. "You should see this." Attached was a photograph taken in the first-class cabin of a recent flight to Tokyo. It showed a flight attendant kneeling beside an elderly black woman, carefully explaining each element of the gourmet meal being served. The same attentive service that had previously been reserved for passengers who looked the part. Alex smiled at the image. Cultural transformation didn't happen in boardrooms or through policy documents. It happened in thousands of small moments like this when people chose to see the humanity in each other. The Horizon Airways revolution had begun with discrimination. It would continue through dignity. One passenger, one flight, one moment of respect at a time. 6 months ago, I sat in seat 2A and was told I didn't belong there. Alexandria Morgan's voice carried through the packed auditorium at the International Aviation Summit, where industry leaders from around the world had gathered to hear about the transformation that had made headlines across the globe. The stage lighting illuminated her professional yet approachable appearance. She had maintained her commitment to substance over image, wearing a simple navy suit that spoke of authority without ostentation. Today I'm here to tell you that what happened to me happens to passengers every day on airlines around the world. The difference is most of them don't have the power to change the system that discriminates against them. On screen behind her, data visualizations displayed the stark before and after metrics of Horizon Airways transformation service. Consistency scores across demographic groups, complaint resolution rates, passenger satisfaction metrics. The improvements were undeniable, represented in vibrant colors and clean graphics that told a story of measurable change. The Dignity Protocol wasn't created to address a PR crisis. Alex continued. It was designed to fulfill the promise we make to every passenger when they purchase a ticket that they will receive the service they paid for, regardless of what they look like or where they come from. In the front row, Diana Rodriguez and Anthony Rivera watched with quiet pride. Their expressions reflected not just professional satisfaction, but personal vindication, the knowledge that their work had created meaningful change. Beside them sat Rachel Thompson, now a recognized industry expert on service standard reforms. Gabriel Martinez and Thomas Baker, whose testimony had helped shape the protocol, occupied honored places as guest speakers. The business case for dignity is clear, Alex explained, displaying the company's financial results. Since implementing these reforms, Horizon Airways has seen double-digit growth in customer loyalty, significant reductions in employee turnover, and a 23% increase in market share on competitive routes. The industry executives leaned forward in their seats, their initial skepticism giving way to calculated interest. What had begun as an ethical imperative was now demonstrating compelling business value, the language that ultimately drove corporate decision-making. But more important than the metrics is the cultural shift Alex emphasized, her voice warming with genuine passion. We've created an environment where employees are empowered to provide excellent service to everyone without fear of reprisal for treating certain passengers too well. She played a brief video showing Horizon employees discussing the changes, including a former ally of James Lawson who had initially resisted the protocol but now acknowledged its positive impact on both passengers and staff. "I used to think some passengers were just naturally more demanding," the woman admitted on screen. "Now I realize we were creating those dynamics through inconsistent service." As Alex concluded her presentation, the moderator opened the floor for questions. The CEO of a major European carrier raised his hand first, his skepticism evident in his posture. "While your results are impressive, isn't this approach incredibly resource-intensive? The anonymous testing alone must cost millions." Alex smiled. "Less than the cost of losing loyal customers who experience discrimination. Less than the legal exposure from potential lawsuits, and certainly less than the moral cost of knowing our company enables discrimination." She displayed a slide showing the financial analysis. "Our ROI on the Dignity Protocol was positive within 4 months. We've reduced complaint handling costs by 62%, increased repeat business in premium cabins by 28%, and seen a 34% reduction in staff turnover. Treating people with dignity isn't just right, it's profitable." Another executive pressed further. "What happened to the employees who couldn't adapt to these new standards?" "Some left voluntarily," Alex acknowledged. "Others found that adapting wasn't as difficult as they feared once they understood the purpose behind the changes. We didn't seek to punish people for past behavior. We sought to create new patterns moving forward." She shared the story of a senior flight attendant who had initially been one of the most resistant to change. "She told me recently that she didn't realize how much energy she'd been spending on maintaining different service standards for different passengers. Now she finds her work both easier and more rewarding." The questions continued for nearly an hour, ranging from implementation details to cultural resistance strategies. Throughout, Alex maintained the same calm conviction that had characterized her response in Seat 2A. Dignity wasn't negotiable, and structural change was both necessary and possible. As the summit concluded, airline executives clustered around Alex, Diana, and Rachel, seeking private consultations on implementing similar reforms. What had begun as one company's response to discrimination was evolving into an industry-wide reckoning. Later that evening, at a small dinner gathering for the summit speakers, Gabriel approached Alex with a question that had been on his mind throughout the proceedings. "You could have fired those flight attendants quietly and implemented changes gradually avoiding the public spotlight," he observed, swirling the wine in his glass thoughtfully. "Why take such a visible, comprehensive approach?" Alex considered the question carefully. The ambient music and soft lighting created an intimate atmosphere for honest conversation. "Because change doesn't happen in the shadows. It happens when patterns are exposed to light, when people who've been suffering in silence see that their experiences matter." She glanced around the room, where industry leaders who had initially dismissed her approach now eagerly sought her team's guidance. "And because dignity isn't just a customer service issue," she continued, "it's a fundamental human right. We weren't just fixing a service problem, we were addressing a moral failure." Thomas Baker joined their conversation, his judicial bearing softened by the informal setting. "I've been flying first class for 30 years, he reflected, "and I was completely blind to what was happening around me. It took watching your experience to make me see the patterns." "That's how privilege works," Alex replied simply. "It's invisible to those who have it." Across the room, Rachel was engaged in conversation with a group of flight attendants from various airlines, sharing implementation strategies for frontline staff. Her animated gestures and confident expression showed how far she had come from the hesitant junior attendant afraid to challenge her superiors. What had begun as one woman's stand against discrimination had evolved into a movement that was reshaping expectations across the industry. As the evening concluded, Alex found a moment of quiet reflection on the hotel terrace. The Geneva skyline twinkled below aircraft lights moving steadily across the night sky like stars in motion. She thought of her mother who had cleaned hotel rooms for 30 years, facing the same dismissive attitudes Alex had encountered in first class. The sandwich incident hadn't just been about Alex's experience. It represented generations of indignities endured by people deemed unworthy of equal treatment. She remembered her mother's words, "Never let them make you feel small. But if they try, use that moment to make the world larger for those who come after you." The next morning, Alex boarded a Horizon Airways flight back to headquarters. As she settled into seat 2A, deliberately choosing the same position that had sparked the revolution, the senior flight attendant approached with a warm smile. "Welcome aboard, Ms. Morgan," she said, offering a pre-flight beverage with the same attentive service provided to every first-class passenger. No false deference because of Alex's position, but the genuine respect due to any customer regardless of appearance or status. Alex glanced around the cabin, noting the diverse mix of passengers, all receiving identical welcome gestures. A businessman in an expensive suit, a young woman in casual clothes, an elderly couple, a man in traditional African attire, all greeted with the same professional warmth, all offered the same options, all treated with the same dignity. The transformation wasn't perfect. True change never is. But the foundation had been laid for a new standard of dignity in the skies. The Dignity Protocol had become more than a corporate initiative. It had evolved into a philosophy that was spreading throughout the company and beyond. As the plane taxied for takeoff, Alex gazed out the window at the expanding horizon. What had begun with humiliation had evolved into transformation. A simple sandwich had changed not just an airline, but an industry's understanding of what respect truly meant. The flight attendant returned with a warm towel. "Is there anything else you need, Ms. Morgan?" Alex smiled. "No, thank you. Everything is exactly as it should be." 1 year after the sandwich that changed an industry, the Dignity in the Sky standards had spread far beyond Horizon Airways. 8 major carriers had adopted similar protocols, with more implementing partial reforms. The aviation press now published annual rankings of service consistency across demographics, with passengers making booking decisions based on these metrics. Alexandria Morgan received the Global Leadership Award, which she accepted not personally, but on behalf of the passengers who had endured discrimination without the power to change the system. In her brief acceptance speech, she credited Rachel Thompson, Gabriel Martinez, and Thomas Baker, ordinary people who had found the courage to speak truth when it mattered most. In first-class cabins around the world, passengers of all backgrounds now received the service they had paid for, not as a special accommodation, but as a fundamental right. The revolution that began with a sandwich had transformed into something more powerful, the recognition that dignity belongs to everyone regardless of appearance, background, or perceived importance. This powerful story reminds us that true change often begins with a single moment of courage. Alexandria Morgan's experience reveals how discrimination persists in everyday spaces, not always in dramatic confrontations, but in the subtle differences of how people are treated based on appearance alone. If this story moved you, please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel for more inspiring content about courage, dignity, and transformation. Share this video with someone who needs to understand that equal treatment isn't just a nice ideal, it's a fundamental right that changes lives. Remember, you don't need to be a CEO to stand up for dignity. Sometimes all it takes is the courage to document your experience, speak your truth, and refuse to accept that some people deserve less respect than others. Together we can transform systems of inequality, one sandwich, one flight, one moment of courage at a time.